Chapter 8:19. On top of the city wall. Yun Xiaoyao held a ring in his palm as well. Watching Yun Yang and Ji Lingxi walk further and further away, his expression was unusually complicated. Yun Xiaoyao still stood at the top of the city wall until both of them could no longer be seen. The night breeze blew, and soft sighs could be heard from the top of the city wall. He closed his palm gently and gripped the ring tightly in his hand. "I won't open this ring for the rest of my life," Yun Xiaoyao murmured. This was a gift from his son. However, he did not want to know what was inside. He only wanted to keep it in one piece. In one piece. Ji Lingxi and Yun Yang traveled eastward at a moderate pace. Of course, they were moving at their own maximum speed, but they were still much faster than an ordinary person. Both of them sensed their qi as they walked. They had a clear feeling that as long as they wanted to, they could activate their mystical qi with all their might and leave this world to enter the bound of universe. The feeling grew clearer and clearer. However, neither of them had the intention to do so. The Four Seasons Tower was not destroyed yet. Along the way, smoke could be seen rising from the chimneys. The people along the way wore smiles on their faces. It was a smile of complete relaxation and comfort. Every time they approached a village, there would be children playing and chasing each other. Occasionally, they would even run onto the road. There was an endless stream of pedestrians on the road as well, coming and going from all directions. There was no longer the fear and despair when they were besieged by the four countries. Everyone's faces were clearly filled with hope for a better life, as well as a sense of pride and confidence that came from being superior to others. Occasionally, when the army passed by, the owner of the tea stall would greet the soldiers warmly to stop and have a sip of water, serving them with everything he had to express his sincerity. However, the army would not stop, so the owner could only wave and smile as they passed. When the army passed by, the owner of the tea stall simply moved the tea stall to a larger space, almost to the point where it was placed on the main road. When the army passed by again, they simply carried trays and handed bowls of tea to them. How can I not do it? This is my sincerity. The army has its rules, but I have to fulfill my sincerity. Lingxi, do you know that the biggest wish of the 9 of us in this life is nothing more than to be able to witness such a sight? Yin Yang looked at the passers-by contentedly, his heart filled with joy. He could not help slowing down his slow footsteps and stopping to watch the owner of the tea stall serve tea. Big Brother once said that if there was a day when Yutong's people could eat their fill and wear clothes to protect them from the cold, they could walk with their heads held high and their chests puffed out to the outside world, they were proud and arrogant, neither servile or overbearing, then the day of world unity would not be far away. This is the long-cherished wish of US brothers. For this goal, I have no regrets in life or death, no regrets in 100 battles. Now that Yutong is at peace, the unification of Yutong is only a matter of time away. Correspondingly, the people's confidence and self-esteem were all established. Yutong already has an indestructible backbone. As long as this backbone remains, our efforts will not be in vain. Yin Yang said in relief, in other words, the goal that we've fought for our entire lives can be considered accomplished. I haven't let down my brother's trust. When we meet again, I have the face to look them in the eye. I'm so happy and excited. Ji Lingxi said respectfully, all of you are remarkable people. You and my brother are, and so are the other brothers. Yin Yang laughed. You're right. Everyone is. Ji Lingxi said, you mean that you won't participate in Yutong's battle to unify Tianxian in the future? That's right. Yin Yang nodded and said, the situation is clear now. Whether Supreme Cloud is involved or not, this world, Tianxian continent, will definitely be unified in Yutong's hands. It's only a matter of time. Supreme Cloud's existence is more of a spiritual function now. Previously, what I saw on Yutong's people's faces was passion and indignation, but more of it was numb pain and despair. Now, every citizen's face is filled with pride and ambition. Yin Yang smiled and said, this is the foundation of prosperity, the foundation that will never change. Lingxi pondered and asked, but, why would the other countries think that it's a good thing for Yutong to unify the world? The human heart has always been biased. It's only right. Yin Yang said faintly, unifying and being unified are not the same. Even if it's a war, it's hard to say who's right and who's wrong. It's just that everyone has their own standpoint. From an individual standpoint, everyone is right, including Han Sanhe, Zi Yuanlong, Qiu Jianhan, and me. All of our choices are right, they're all beneficial to the country's subjects and people. From what I can see, most of the sovereigns would think that unifying the world in their hands is the best thing for the people. Firstly, it's a sense of ambition, a desire, a sense of accomplishment. At the same time, it's a sense of mission. They all feel that they can govern the world well, that they can benefit the people, and that they can shine for generations to come. Yin Yang's voice was slow. However, it has never been up to them to decide who is the true overlord of the world. Only the general trend of the world can decide, it can be concluded. Yutong has been at the core of war for so many years. Millions of people have been oppressed and oppressed. Sacrifices are embedded in the hearts of almost every Yutong citizen. For a country like this, as long as we're given the slightest bit of hope, we can start a prairie fire. With this as the foundation, if we don't unify the world, who else is more qualified? At the end of the day, it's still the same saying. There's no right or wrong in this world, there's only strength and weakness, only standpoint and choice. We've grown step by step from being bullied by other countries to where we are now. The backbone that's grown in war is something that no one can beat, it can't be crushed. Yin Yang was in high spirits as he looked at the roadside. As the weather gradually warmed up, there was already a layer of emerald green, swaying with the wind, filled with the air of life and exuberant vitality. A young boy ran out from the roadside, blinking his big eyes when he saw Yin Yang and Lingxi. "Uncle, do you want to come in for a cup of tea?" Yin Yang laughed and patted the boy's head, saying, "Uncle isn't thirsty." "What's your name?" The boy was rather shy as he answered, "I'm Sanhuzi." Sanhuzi. Yin Yang chuckled, amused. "I guess you have two older brothers, Dehuzi and Erhuzi. Am I right?" The boy looked at Yin Yang in surprise. "Uncle, how did you know? Are you a relative of ours?" "How do I know you?" "I have a very good memory." Lingxi could not help giggling. Yin Yang said, "Where are your two older brothers? Aren't they home? Why didn't they bring you along to play?" The boy said excitedly, "Both of my older brothers have become generals. They're all great heroes. Mama said that they're with Daddy, they're all great heroes, great generals. Huzi even offered incense and prayed for them during the spring festival this year. She was with her father. Offering incense." Chapter 820. Yin Yang was taken aback as he looked at the white couplet that had yet to fade on the tea house. Only half of it remained after the wind and rain, dancing in the wind. Yin Yang's thoughts raced, feeling an indescribable bitterness in his heart. After a while, he said softly, not bad at all. They are all great heroes, Yutong's good men. Sanhuzi, you have to be a hero too when you grow up." "Yes." The boy said proudly, "I won't embarrass my brother and father. Our family is Yutong's heroes." Yin Yang forced a smile. His hand that was caressing the boy's head glowed with a purple chi. An extremely pure innate purple chi then melted into the boy's body. Unbeknownst to him, 4 of the 3 chakras in the boy's body had been awakened by Yin Yang's innate purple chi. The remaining purple chi was hidden in the boy's other chakras, waiting for him to begin his cultivation, and he would be able to break through step by step. At the same time, a cultivation method had entered the boy's mind. The boy felt a wave of dizziness. His body swayed and he suddenly fell to the ground, unconscious. Sanhuzi. A woman in a coarse dress and hairpin dashed out from the tea house, her expression unusually anxious. "It's all right," Yin Yang said softly, "Sanhuzi will be fine after a nap." He'll be outstanding from now on, even more outstanding than his father and brother. The woman glared at Yun Yang angrily and said, Who are you? What did you do to Sanhuzi? Yun Yang smiled. Sanhuzi is a good child. I won't harm him. The woman, who was initially filled with rage, felt that Yun Yang's smile was too warm, her resentment dissipating into thin air. The more she looked at the handsome face, the more familiar it seemed, but she could not recall where she had seen it before. She could not help but be puzzled. Who are you? Why do I feel like I've seen you somewhere before? Are you my relative? Yun Yang smiled and turned to leave. Take good care of the child. Your family's efforts will be rewarded eventually. Yutang will not forget your contributions. Before his words echoed in the air, Yun Yang and Ji Lingxi had already disappeared at the end of the road. The woman hugged her child and thought hard, who is this young man? Why can't I remember? My memory is very good, I must have seen it before, but why can't I remember? Suddenly, he felt something in his hand. Lowering his head, he saw 2 banknotes in his hand. Each of them was worth 1,000 taels. Looking at the 2 large banknotes in front of him, his heart couldn't help but pound wildly. Was this left behind by that young man? Why did he give me so much money? Could it be that he was really a relative of mine who pitied me, an orphan and a widow? Could it be that my memory wasn't as good as I thought? How could I forget such an outstanding relative? He returned to the tea-house absent-mindedly and inadvertently saw the portrait of Lord Supreme Cloud on the wall that he had spent a silver tael to invite back. At a time when many people were fighting over him, he used his status as a soldier's family member and a martyr's family member to invite him back with 1 tael of silver. In the portrait, there was a smiling, handsome, and dignified young master dressed in purple. His eyes seemed to be looking at her warmly. The woman's mind suddenly jolted as she finally remembered who the person was. She cried out involuntarily, It's Lord Supreme Cloud. As soon as she came back to her senses, she dashed out like a madman. Looking at the end of the road, tears streamed down her cheeks. Then, she dropped to her knees and kowtowed continuously as a sign of respect, sobbing uncontrollably. It was an indescribable excitement, pride, and joy that came from the bottom of her heart. For some reason, the neighbors crowded around her. Third aunt, what are you doing? The woman lifted her tear-stained face, crying and laughing at the same time. Lord Supreme Cloud came to our place just now. He even carried Sanhuzi and talked to him for a while. He even gave me banknotes. It's Lord Supreme Cloud. Without exception, everyone was shocked and they heard this. A few of them immediately beat their chests and stomped their feet. I knew it, I knew it. I saw 2 people from afar, like immortals descending to the mortal world, talking to Sanhuzi. I thought they were passing merchants. But it's Lord Supreme Cloud. Sigh, I'm as blind as a bat. It was such a great opportunity to pay my respects to the Emperor, but I missed it. Everyone was envious and excited, but not a single one of them had any doubts. In Yutang now, no one dared to impersonate Lord Supreme Cloud. It's definitely not a bad thing that Sanhuzi has fainted. Lord Supreme Cloud must have given Sanhuzi something good, or else he wouldn't have fainted. This is a rare opportunity. This child is a blessed man, to be able to gain Supreme Cloud's favor. Third aunt, your days of happiness are yet to come. Your casual action just now might have created a great general for Yutang. Ji Lingxi looked at Yun Yang. Ji Lingxi looked at Yun Yang. She had seen Yun Yang do the same thing many times along the way. Yes and no. It all depends on the child's future. Yun Yang said, still, this path can be smoother than most people's. His brother and father have died in the battlefield for Yutang today. It's fine if I haven't met such a child, but since I've met him, I'm obligated to give him a future. This child's future can be determined from now on. These things are destined to spread. Many people will know that these children were personally taught by Lord Supreme Cloud. Who in the entire empire of Yutang will look up to them? Therefore, The future of these children has been decided the moment you made your move, hasn't it? Ji Lingxi looked at Yun Yang, her eyes sparkling. She sounded doubtful, but her tone was firm. Ji Lingxi's feelings towards Yun Yang had always been the same. Ever since the night they had met inexplicably and asked for Yun Yang's help, staying in his house, Ji Lingxi did not understand why she had not been wary of this man at all. The more they interacted, the more certain she was of this person. Ji Lingxi finally understood her feelings, especially after they had parted ways and she was saved by Yun Yang. To hold his hand and grow old with him. However, this was only the ordinary affection between a man and a woman, nothing more. The naive love between a young man and a woman of a suitable age was mostly just a wish to tie the knot and grow old together. There was no time to truly understand the other deeper aspects. After all, these were things that could only be verified with time. However, as they got to know Yun Yang step by step, Yun Yang's intelligence, Yun Yang's planning, Yun Yang's battle prowess, Yun Yang's bravery, Yun Yang's. In the end, they realized that Yun Yang was actually one of the famous 9 Supremes, the only remaining Supreme Cloud, the 9 Supremes think tank. To Ji Lingxi, it felt like her understanding of her sweetheart was being refreshed again and again. It was as if the Yun Yang she saw each day was a different Yun Yang, growing more and more perfect by the day. To put it in a more conventional way, there was no best, only better. Until now, today, Ji Lingxi once again experienced a sentiment from Yun Yang. It was a noble sentiment that would not hesitate to sacrifice everything for the country and its people. It was the temperament of a great chivalrous man who had compassion for the world, almost like a saint. Perhaps, the term great chivalrous man should no longer be used to describe him. It would be more appropriate to describe him as a chivalrous man, a chivalrous saint. In addition to this realization, Ji Lingxi could not help but feel that Yun Yang was a rare talent. She was even more pleased with her own sharp eyes for spotting a hero. I fell in love with him when he displayed his flirtatious attitude. How far-sighted I am. Back then, it was as if I had picked out a piece of jade from a pile of trash, a flawless piece of jade. My eyes are really sharp indeed. Counting down the days, it's almost the August 1st comrades reunion. I've already abstained from alcohol for 5 days. I'll abstain for another 2 days to maintain my best condition. When that day comes, I swear to make those 90-odd people look at me in a different light and bow down to me. Chapter 8:21. At the same time, Ji Lingxi was somewhat ashamed of her own inferiority. He's so outstanding. Why do I feel like I'm not worthy of him? I want to be more outstanding, to work harder, to have a higher cultivation base. On the other side, a certain father and mother were speechless. Little girl, how can you belittle yourself like this? Your cultivation is obviously higher than that brat's. You don't lose to him in any way. It's that brat's great fortune that he can win your heart. You can't show weakness first and admit your inferiority first. If you are willing to give in, your father and mother will directly lose everything. They will definitely be laughed to death by that swindler. You must not let them down. Yin Yang had a strange feeling in his heart. They were walking normally, so why was Ji Lingxi holding his hand, intentionally or unintentionally? Was she taking the initiative? Yin Yang, look, the clouds on the mountain over there are so beautiful. They look like a big fish. Don't you think so? Ji Lingxi pointed at the clouds in the sky with one hand and held Yin Yang's hand with the other to let him look. Yin Yang followed the voice and frowned. Fish? That's clearly a lump of neither, all right? How was it beautiful? What kind of aesthetic perception was that? However, ever since Ji Lingxi had held his hand for this reason, they had never parted ever since they held each other's hands. Look over there. It's a little squirrel. It's so cute. Look over there. Huh, what's that bull doing? Ayaya. Why are those 2 dogs stacked on top of each other? Ugh. Don't look. Yin Yang was exasperated for a long time. This was the place of a life and death duel. but why did it become a sweet sightseeing trip in Ji Lingxi's eyes? Both of them had set off a day later. If they had turned into the clouds and traveled at full speed, they would have arrived long ago. However, with Ji Lingxi following behind, it was rare for Yun Yang to travel at full speed. Even though both of them were much faster than ordinary people, it was still a distance of nearly 10,000 miles. They had already wasted a lot of time delivering gifts along the way, and now, they had to stop from time to time to enjoy the scenery and have some fun. The 3-day deadline that Yun Yang had set had passed with a swoosh. When the 3-day deadline had passed, Yun Yang and Luo Bingyun had only covered less than half of their journey. Although it is said that a man's words are trustworthy and a man's words are worthless, it doesn't matter if he breaks his promise to the enemy. After Yun Yang had forcefully found an excuse for himself, he felt at ease and was even more at ease. Since I can't make it in time and I'm destined to be late, I might as well let nature take its course and do whatever I want. Therefore, both Yun Yang and Ji Lingxi traveled slower and slower. If they did not have a certain level of speed, who knew when they would be able to reach their destination? The Four Seasons Tower's men, who did not know what was going on, almost broke down. By this time, all the pinnacle experts of the Four Seasons Tower were already waiting at Tianxian Cliff. With Mr. Nian as the leader, the entire nest was turned out in full force. The scale was even grander than the ambush Ling Xiaozui and the rest had encountered previously. This was Supreme Cloud, the sole remaining member of the 9 Supremes, who had set the date in front of everyone in the world. It had to be a date that was set in stone. There was no room for error. They would not leave until one side was completely annihilated, or both sides would perish together. There was no room for negotiation between the two sides. In spite of this, the symbolic day of the decisive battle had already arrived. The Four Seasons Tower had made all the necessary preparations. Once Yun Yang was killed, the mission would be complete and the fact that the Four Seasons Tower was unshakable would be proven once again. The Four Seasons Tower's men were filled with confidence and excitement as they set up the spiritual restraining formation at Tianxian Cliff in the quickest manner possible. Then, they waited quietly for the other party to come. Who would have thought that after waiting for a whole day, the expected and reasonable opportunity to catch the enemy off guard did not appear? 2 days later, there was still no sign of him. The unpredictable ambush still did not come. Seeing that the 3rd day was about to pass, everyone was already on the highest alert, waiting for Supreme Cloud to come and fight to the death. It was obvious that Supreme Cloud was prepared to fight on the day of the duel without the slightest bit of hesitation. In the end, the agreed time had passed, but the main character did not come. This time, everyone was dumbfounded. You're waiting for a battle in front of the whole world. Don't tell me you're treating your words as nonsense. It doesn't make sense. You're Supreme Cloud, the hottest legend in this world. How can you go back on your words? I still believe that Supreme Cloud is a man of his word. He'll definitely come. There's probably something fishy going on and he's being held back by something. Mr. Nian said, why don't we wait patiently for another day? The Four Seasons Tower can afford to wait. In spite of this, 7 to 8 days passed. Everyone was about to get hemorrhoids from waiting, thinking that they could not wait any longer, but Supreme Cloud still had not come. Then, the Four Seasons Tower scouts, who were lying in ambush at the perimeter, were shocked to find that Dongxuan's troops stationed at the Fortress of Resilience had surrounded Tianxian Cliff again and again under the leadership of Marshal Fu Baogua. They were densely packed like an impenetrable copper wall, airtight and impenetrable. Even a mosquito would find it hard to enter and leave freely, let alone a person. What was Supreme Cloud trying to do? What wishful thinking was this? The Four Seasons Tower's experts could not comprehend it at all. Was he planning to use these troops to encircle and annihilate them? Was it possible? There was indeed a limit to one's strength. We can't kill all of these people, but if we're determined to leave and retreat, you can't stop us even if you're able to gather 10 times the number of troops. If all else fails, we'll just fly. We're the best at flying, you know. No matter how domineering the deicide Bao is, its firing range is still limited. As long as we don't risk our lives, what can you do to us? Then, what were these troops here for? They couldn't possibly be here to raise the flag and boost their morale, could they? Regarding this question, Mr. Nian sent someone down to ask Fu Baogua directly, "What are you guys doing here?" Fu Baogua answered straightforwardly, "We're here to watch the battle and cheer for Supreme Cloud. To ensure that this battle won't be disrupted by a third party." The Four Seasons Tower was speechless at the answer. Disrupted by a third party? This reason was very reasonable and very powerful. However, the problem was, which person, organization, or force would have the courage and ability to intervene in this battle of the century? To put it bluntly, even if a third party were to intervene, such as the concourse of the underworld, Ling Xiaozui and Du Guchou, they would only be helping Supreme Cloud. Would they target the third party who helped Supreme Cloud as well? Chapter 822. Stay here if you want to. After all, the shockwaves alone can kill a lot of people when the fight really breaks out. If you're not afraid of death, do you think we're afraid of killing you by mistake? We really don't mind at all. However, after waiting for a few more days and there was still no movement, the Four Seasons Tower finally lost their patience. They sent someone to investigate. The scout flew out anxiously, searching everywhere like a bolt of lightning. It was only after he had traveled a third of the distance that he saw Yun Yang leisurely strolling over on the path below. At that speed, he would only be able to cover a few hundred miles in a day. Compared to a third of the total distance, he would have to walk for at least another 10 days. What was even more infuriating was that he clearly had a rare horse by his side, but he just didn't ride it. Instead, he led the horse along the way. Seeing this, the Four Seasons Tower's expert was infuriated. "We're waiting for you over there, hoping for you, but here you are, leading a horse with one hand and a beauty with the other, so leisurely. May I ask if you're walking the horse or flirting with the girl? It doesn't look like you're in a hurry to meet the duel." Yin Yang was climbing a mountain with Ji Lingxi, admiring the beautiful view of the rolling clouds from the top of the mountain when he heard a strange sound coming from the sky. A black-clothed man fell to the ground like a meteor. His momentum was not small at all. The newcomer glared at both of them. "Lord Supreme Cloud, what do you mean by this?" From the tone of his words, it was obvious that the newcomer was from the Four Seasons Tower. Yin Yang rolled his eyes. "What is it?" "We've agreed to settle our grudges at Tianxian Cliff 3 days later, but Lord Supreme Cloud, you're still not there yet." "What do you mean by this?" The man in black was furious. "Have you forgotten the agreement, Lord Supreme Cloud?" Yin Yang replied matter-of-factly, "How can I forget? How can I forget the duel I set myself? My memory is definitely better than yours. You're worrying too much." The man in black said angrily, "Then why are you still here? A man's words are meant to be kept, and a man can't stand without his word. I didn't expect Lord Supreme Cloud to go back on his word. Do you think you're a man of your word?" Yin Yang replied, "Go back on my word? Don't you think your words have gone too far?" The man in black replied, "Up until today, Lord Supreme Cloud, you've exceeded the agreed time limit by a whole 9 days. It was supposed to be 3 days later, but now it was already the 12th day. I wonder how Lord Supreme Cloud would justify himself." Yin Yang said slowly, "Look, you know that I said 3 days later that day. Isn't it 3 days later now?" The man in black, Yin Yang said, "Whether it's the 12th day later or the 13th day later, it's still 3 days later. I remember the battle 3 days later, I dare not forget it. However, as for which day it will be 3 days later, it's up to me, the one who made the agreement, to decide, not you. That's how it should be." What's self-justifying? Isn't that what the logic says? The man in black was so angry that he almost spat out a mouthful of blood. His entire body trembled as he gritted his teeth and hissed, "Shameless. Shameless. Utterly shameless. I didn't expect the 9 Supreme think tank to be such a shameless person. How insane. It's infuriating." Yin Yang said faintly, all of you are uncultured and have misinterpreted my words. Who can you blame for waiting in the same spot like idiots? Now, you're trying to turn the tables on me. How preposterous. Why do you look so angry? Do you really want to teach me a lesson here? You can come down then, I'll teach you any time. The man in black was panting heavily, his eyes almost popping out of their sockets. However, asking him to come down and fight to the death with Yun Yang. What a joke. The cultivation base of both Yun Yang and the girl in front of him was unfathomable. I'd be courting death if I went down alone. Do you really think I'm stupid? I'm so angry that I'm about to die, but I still have to treasure my own life. The man in black held his breath and said, according to Lord Supreme Cloud, doesn't that mean that 3 years later also belongs to the category of 3 days later? Is this the deeper meaning of Lord Supreme Cloud's words? Yin Yang replied calmly, you're right. You've become smart in an instant. You're worth teaching, you're worth teaching. The man in black was so angry that he was rendered speechless. Encountering such a shameless person, especially when he could not be reasoned with. What should he do? What could he do? Fortunately, Yin Yang continued, it's a pity that this duel is destined to not drag on for so long. How can I allow all of you to live for another 3 years? Wait patiently, I'll go straight ahead. Look at the distance, there's not much time left. Don't be impatient. I'll give you one last piece of advice. Don't be surprised, let nature take its course. The man in black felt like his liver was about to explode from anger, on the verge of breaking down. Yin Yang said, remember to tell Mr. Nian when you go back that those who do great things must have patience. While there's still time, all of you can still perfect the spiritual restraining formation, linger on with your last breaths, and enjoy life for a few more days. I'm doing this for your own good. When the day of the duel comes, your souls will be dead and you won't have the chance to enjoy life anymore. Without another word, the man in black turned into a gust of black air and left at a speed much faster than when he had come. He really could not stay any longer. If he were to let Yun Yang say a few more words, he felt that his organs would explode without Yun Yang even having to do anything, and he would die right there and then. He would really die of anger. What a pity. Yin Yang and Ji Lingxi spoke in unison. If this fellow could not hold back his anger and charge down to fight, how wonderful would that be? Ji Lingxi would step forward and activate the red light to counteract the attack, and she would be able to cripple this fellow right here and now. Without a doubt, she would be more than happy to chop off one of Mr. Nian's arms. However, she did not expect this fellow to be so tolerant, to make a prompt decision and gallop away. Let's continue forward. I remember that after this valley, the scenery there is not bad. On one side is ice and snow that hasn't melted for years, while on the other side, there are actually hundreds of flowers blooming. It's a marvelous and breathtaking sight. Really? Really? Come, let's go. Let's go quickly. Don't miss out on such a beautiful view. Ji Lingxi was overjoyed when she heard that, pulling Yun Yang along as they ran. Reddy snorted and followed them unwillingly. Yin Yang was helpless against this fellow who had chased after him despite being thousands of miles away from Tiantang City. Stroking the horse's mane, he said, Reddy, I'm leaving in a few days. What do you think you're going to do? Reddy snorted and rubbed itself against Yun Yang's body intimately. The meaning behind it was indescribable. Yin Yang sighed to himself. In these few days, Yun Yang had combed Reddy's meridians many times and fed it plenty of treasured resources. He had even squeezed out half a bowl of his blood for this fellow to drink. In spite of this, the only result was that this fellow was becoming more and more inseparable from him. Yin Yang could not make up his mind regarding such a spiritual, unparalleled treasure. What should he do? Release it into the forest? Or leave it on the battlefield? Would it be possible if he brought it away from this world? Chapter 823. However, he had to admit that the chances of him using a warhorse in the future would be fewer and fewer. Perhaps, there would be none at all. However, Reddy was so reliant on him now. If he were to disappear, Reddy might do something stupid because it could not stand the loneliness and coldness. Such a spiritual steed would only acknowledge one master in its lifetime. It was not the first time that a steed was buried with its master when it passed away. No matter what, Yun-yang did not wish to see such a thing happen. Reddy was unusually happy to be able to stay by its master's side. Sometimes, it would run around happily, sometimes bringing a brightly colored flower to present to Yun-yang. Sometimes, it would rub itself against Yun-yang's side, from left to right, its shiny tail whipping around, as if it wished it could be a horse that stuck to Yun-yang. Sometimes, it would stop at the peak of the mountain and whinny into the sky, recreating the elegance of a king of horses. Ji Lingxi was not disgusted by Reddy's obsession. It was not only Yun-yang, but Reddy was also trying its best to please Ji Lingxi. He didn't seem to realize that his master would leave him after this battle. This alone made Ji Lingxi exceptionally fond of Reddy. The crux of the problem now is, what will happen to Reddy if we enter the bound of universe? Where will it go? Yun-yang asked Ji Lingxi, his heart filled with melancholy. Ji Lingxi's hand that was caressing Reddy stopped abruptly. She was stunned. Because she also realized that this reality might bring about future troubles, and this future trouble was extremely serious, and there was a high possibility that it would happen. Can't you bring Reddy along with you? Although Ji Lingxi's cultivation base was profound, her state of mind was far too lacking. She panicked at the moment of enlightenment. Honestly, I want to bring Reddy along, Yun-yang said slowly. But that's not a good thing either. Reddy's happiness is based more on this worldly world. It can roam freely and display its elegance as a king of horses. If it were to be taken away by force, it would still not be happy. It would be depressed and unhappy for the rest of its life. The level of the bound of universe is far higher than that of the Tianxian continent. It is foreseeable that there would be so many experts there. Perhaps, a cultivator with a slightly higher cultivation base would be able to fly faster than Reddy at full speed. Moreover, he would be able to fly through the air without any obstacles. Under such circumstances, how could Reddy be happy? It's the best steed in the world, a fine horse. Its own speed is the root of its existence. If it doesn't have this special ability, it won't just be depressed, it'll also be filled with grief and resentment. What good will that do it? This kind of precious steed is only suitable to exist in a secular world like the profound sky continent. If it were to head to the Xianhuang world, it would lose all of its pride and die a lonely death. Yin-yang sighed softly. Rather than that, I'd rather leave it here and let it roam freely, enjoying its life. It wants to join the war and gallop on the battlefield, so I asked Fu Baogua to take care of it. If it wants to be free and be the king of all the horses in the world, I will let it go and give it freedom without any restraints. I don't want it to be unhappy. It doesn't want to take the slightest risk, what's more, the foreseeable bad atmosphere. Ji Lingxi said, but it obviously sees you as its only owner now. It won't be happy without you, it will still be depressed and lonely. Yin-yang said in a low voice, at least it won't die. If it were to go to the bound of universe, it would definitely die after losing all its pride. It would be a sad death too, without any dignity as a king. Ji Lingxi looked at Reddy who was playing around and said, not necessarily. With us taking care of it, how could it die? Yin-yang said profoundly, what I'm trying to say is that it's a king. A king among horses is also a king. Once a king's dignity is profaned, how can a king continue to exist? It's the same for humans and horses. Humans might even drag out an ignoble existence, hoping for a future. The world of horses is too simple. Once its dignity is lost, that will be its end. With a long neigh, Reddy galloped over from afar, holding a beautiful red flower the size of a bowl in its mouth. It raised its head to deliver it to Yun-yang. Yin-yang took it and Reddy nudged Yun-yang's hand with its head again, moving towards Ji Lingxi. Yin-yang chuckled. You want me to give this flower to her? Reddy shook its head and tail in a leisurely manner, carefree and happy. Yin Yang delivered the red flower to Ji Lingxi with both hands. Ji Lingxi accepted it with a blush and hugged Reddy to give it a kiss. Reddy was so happy that it jumped 30 feet before it turned into a red shadow and sped away. Ji Lingxi was even more reluctant now. Yin Yang, Reddy seems to have sensed something. Yin Yang felt a pang in his heart as he said, Reddy is already a psychic existence now. It can definitely sense something, so it's releasing itself to the fullest, leaving behind the most beautiful and memorable memories that it's willing to see. In the next few days, Reddy grew more and more excited. It came and went like the wind, never leaving the two of them. Yin Yang had a clear feeling that Reddy was trying to please him, trying to make him happy. Perhaps it was trying its best to make him stay, or perhaps it wanted to make both of them happier in their last moments together. Yin Yang and Ji Lingxi walked slower and slower. The distance they covered dropped from a few hundred miles a day to less than 100 miles, perhaps even less. In these few days, Yin Yang would travel thousands of miles from time to retrieve fresh pasture. He would even grind the eastern amethyst into powder and mix it with the grass, feeding it to Reddy. Reddy ate it with relish, wagging its tail happily as it ate. The atmosphere was joyous. However, Yin Yang realized that the massive amount of spiritual qi that could make an ordinary cultivator explode did not seem to have much effect on Reddy. It was just chewing on the spiritual qi as if it was munching on ordinary grass. Out of curiosity, Yin Yang fed the eastern amethyst to Reddy for every meal. Therefore, Reddy had eaten 7 to 8 pieces of eastern amethyst in total. If Ling Xiaozui and Du Guchou were to see this, the two bosses would probably go crazy. They might even fight Yin Yang to the death. This was the eastern amethyst. Boss, don't be so wasteful. We only have a few pieces and you're actually adding food to the horse every meal? What happened to our friendship? However, this was not the only waste. Yin Yang squeezed out some of his own blood and smeared it on the fodder just like how he had tempted Reddy back then, feeding it to Reddy. Chapter 8:24. However, this morning, when Yin Yang fed Reddy the grass that he had prepared, Reddy munched on it, looking like it was the day before. However, Yin Yang was acutely aware that 2 drops of tears were slowly forming in Reddy's eyes. Although it was slow, it finally landed on the grass with a plop. It was swallowed by Reddy immediately. If Yin Yang had been careless, he would have missed it. Yin Yang felt his heart tremble violently. At that moment, an inexplicable sourness and loss grew within him. It was hard to suppress and impossible to calm down. Yin Yang straightened up abruptly, looking at the Tianxian cliff that could be vaguely seen from afar. For a moment, he felt a surge of emotions that he could not describe. It was an indescribable feeling that was surging within him. After Reddy finished eating the fodder, it, who had always been cheerful these days, suddenly felt a little tired. The horse rubbed its head against Yin Yang for a long time, not letting him leave. It even placed its head in Yin Yang's embrace. Just like that, it allowed Yin Yang to hug it and fell asleep peacefully. Yin Yang hugged Reddy, his expression solemn. Ji Lingxi leaned against Yin Yang's side considerately, leaning against Reddy as well, resting quietly together. At that moment, the two humans and the horse seemed to have become one. Under the morning sun, they seemed to be dyed with a layer of golden radiance, extremely dazzling. On this day, Yin Yang and Ji Lingxi did not move a single step, staying on the peak for the entire day. When dusk covered the earth, Hong Hong finally woke up. Standing up with a flip, it shook the mane on its body and neighed towards the sky. The momentum of this long hiss was earth-shattering. There was an indescribable drawn-out aura, and the mane all over its body seemed to be on fire. It lowered its head and rubbed itself against Yin Yang's leg, his hand, his chest, and even his head intimately, just like how it used to do in the past. Then, it whined softly and rubbed itself against Ji Lingxi's body as well. Then, it began to look for grass by the side, its tail swishing as if nothing had happened. Ji Lingxi asked, "When are we leaving?" Yin Yang answered quietly, "Tomorrow morning." That night. Yin Yang took out a lot of ingredients from his space and both of them worked together to prepare a sumptuous banquet. He even took out a pot of wine and drank with them. To everyone's surprise, Hong Hong also drank 3 big bowls. It was so happy that it raised its head to the sky and let out a long neigh that shook the valley. It was late at night. Yin Yang and Ji Lingxi seemed to have fallen asleep. Hong Hong, who was lying on the side, quietly stood up. Its eyes glowed crimson in the darkness, staring longingly at Yun Yang's face. Cautiously, it stuck out its tongue and licked the corner of Yun Yang's clothes. It then took 2 steps back and stared at Yun Yang's face for a long, long time without moving. Her big, round eyes were gradually filled with tears, and finally, they fell one by one in a string. After a moment, it turned around slowly, as if it was afraid of startling Yun Yang. It retreated about 70 to 80 feet away quietly and with a sudden turn, leaped into the darkness, leaving swiftly and soundlessly. In the blink of an eye, it had already gone to a peak several miles away. It was the tallest peak in the area, much higher than the peak where Yun Yang and Ji Lingxi were. Hong Hong stood tall on the peak like a torch, its head held high and its chest puffed out. It turned its head abruptly, still looking longingly at the direction where Yun Yang and Ji Lingxi were resting. It did not move for a long, long time. The night wind was chilly. Hong Hong's mane danced wildly in the wind, but it did not move at all, as if it had turned into a beautiful statue. After an unknown amount of time, Hong Hong finally turned its head slowly and retracted its longing gaze. It lowered its head and whimpered softly. Its hooves stomped restlessly on the mountain top, as if it was hesitating. It really, really wanted to run back to its most favorite, warmest master, and relive the tenderness and unwillingness to part with him, the longing that was hard to part with. In spite of this, its tears did not return even after they had flowed to the bottom of its feet. Then, it finally turned and left. This time, like a bolt of red lightning, it headed straight for the dense forest and did not look back. Early in the morning, Ji Lingxi woke up from her dream. She opened her eyes in a daze and realized that she was leaning against Yun Yang, her head resting on his shoulder. She could not help feeling shy and sat up quickly. Looking around, she realized that something seemed to be missing. It was only after some time that Ji Lingxi reacted. Her eyes darted around and she murmured, "Where's Hong Hong? Has it gone out to look for food?" Yin Yang's deep voice was tinged with an indescribable emotion as he said, "Hong Hong has left." Left? Ji Lingxi stood up with a swoosh and cried out involuntarily, "Why has it left?" Yin Yang closed his eyes and said, "Hong Hong is a spiritual plant of creation. We didn't even think of bringing it along when we left this time, but it chased us all the way from Tiantang City to here as a horse. We've known each other for a long time now. There's no need to express it in words. Actually, I knew then that Hong Hong had sensed that I was about to leave and that it would be difficult for us to meet again. That's why it chased after me without a care in the world, wanting to bid farewell to me. Along the way, it tried its best to be obedient, circling around us. No matter what I gave it, it ate it. Whether it liked it or not, it ate with all its might." Yin Yang's eyes were closed, his voice was flat and without a hint of emotion. In spite of this, Ji Lingxi could sensitively feel that Yun Yang's heart was surging with waves of emotions. What it wants is nothing more than a happy time together at the end. Now, we're almost at Tianxian Cliff. It knew that it couldn't follow us anymore, so it left quietly in the middle of the night last night. Yin Yang closed his eyes in a melancholy manner. What lingered before his eyes was the sight of Hong Hong standing on a faraway peak and looking back at him. The bitterness in his heart was indescribable. "Goodbye, Hong Hong. I'll miss you." Yin Yang heaved a long sigh, feeling a boundless melancholy. "I only wish for you to be happy, free and unrestrained. When I return to Tianxian, I'll look for you at once, feed you, gallop with you, and be filled with endless joy." In front of Tianxian Cliff, Yin Yang came fluttering in his purple robe while Ji Lingxi, who was dressed in white, had finally arrived. As the two of them walked, it was as if they were a match made in heaven. The man was handsome, elegant, while the woman was an outstanding beauty, graceful and graceful. However, when they arrived near Tianxian Cliff, Yun Yang's expression changed abruptly. His deific consciousness had sent him a very serious question. Why is Fu Baoguo's Eastern Border Army here? Judging by the scale, he's obviously mobilized the entire eastern border. What's he trying to do? Looking at the densely packed military camps in front of him and the flags fluttering in the air, Yun Yang was overwhelmed with shock. As requested by the chief of Sea Soul Clothes, I'm recommending a book, The Shallow and Lousy, Continuing the Flame. It will be available on the 1st of August. I hope that brothers and sisters who are capable will subscribe. Chapter 825. Yun Yang was dumbfounded. What was going on? What was going on? What was the Eastern Border Army doing here? Both of them approached swiftly. Greetings, Lord Supreme Cloud. The sentinel kneeled down to pay his respects with eyes filled with fervor, his voice loud enough to tear through the clouds. The entire base was plunged into an unprecedented commotion after this announcement. Then, a deafening horn sounded. The general's assembly drum sounded as well. Within moments, Fu Baoguo had led more than 400 military officers of various ranks and swarmed over. Arriving at the camp gate, these 400 men turned around and knelt in unison. This lowly general, Fu Baoguo, has led 400 men of the eastern border to pay our respects to Lord Supreme Cloud. May Lord Supreme Cloud prosper and vanquish all those who dare. Brothers, please rise, Yun Yang said hurriedly. Our brothers have shed blood on the battlefield and fought hundreds of battles for Yutong. How can I be worthy of such a grand greeting from you brothers? Please don't kill me. Rise quickly, all of you rise. It's just that. Marshal Fu, what are all of you up to? Why are all of you here? Are you giving up on the eastern border and the Fortress of Resilience? Yin Yang asked in an odd tone. Fu Baoguo laughed and said, Don't worry, Lord Supreme Cloud. We've come to Tianxian Cliff under His Majesty's order. His Majesty has given a death order. Even if all 400,000 men of the eastern border die here, Lord Supreme Cloud is not allowed to meet with any mishap. We must protect Lord Supreme Cloud. Yin Yang was shaken. Is this true? Fu Baoguo replied, How can it not be true? Otherwise, this lowly general wouldn't have dared to act on his own. Of course, before I left, I've laid down a strategy to guard the place. Even if Dongxian were to invade, it's impossible for them to breach the Fortress of Resilience in a short amount of time. Besides, Dongxian has just been defeated and Yutong has the power to unify Tianxian. Dongxian probably won't dare act recklessly. Yin Yang heaved a deep sigh. I'm grateful for His Majesty's hospitality, but there's no need for this. Marshal Fu, this duel with the Four Seasons Tower is within the martial world's grudge. There are countless hidden reasons within. I'm not saying that all of you can't help me here, but it's not necessary. Fu Baoguo replied, The imperial edict has been issued, this lowly general dare not defy it. Please do not make things difficult for this subordinate, Lord Supreme Cloud. What a beautiful way to put it. I'm carrying the imperial edict. If you don't let me help you, you're asking me to defy the edict and die. How could you do this? Even if you're Supreme Cloud, you can't do this. Yin Yang could not help falling silent, knowing the truth behind the other party's words. Looking at the fanatical and determined expressions of the people around him, how could he not know that it was useless to persuade them? A surge of warmth flowed from the bottom of his heart, his emotions surging. It was beyond Yun Yang's expectations that the emperor would issue such an order. 400,000 soldiers were guarding Yutong's gateway, the Fortress of Resilience. The position was of utmost importance, but the emperor had actually given such a resolute order. He would rather give up the gateway and put the empire at risk to protect himself. Strictly speaking, this was actually a random order. However, the Eastern Line's defenders just happened to accept the order and came over happily. They all displayed a will that didn't care about death. It couldn't be said that this was not absurd. In spite of this, when it came to Yutong's god, the Nine Supremes think tank, Supreme Cloud, Yun Yang, it was a win-win situation. Since the Emperor has decreed so, Yun Yang shall not make things difficult for Marshal Fu. However, I still have a request. Lord Supreme Cloud, please speak. I will do my best. In order to avoid any accidental injuries during the battle, General Fu, please give the order for all the troops to retreat 20 li according to the original formation. After the battle breaks out, if there are any major movements, retreat at least another 20 li at the right time. Fu Baogua thought about it and said, sure. Baogua will definitely wait for the right opportunity. I won't sacrifice myself for nothing. Thank you very much, Marshal Fu. Lord Supreme Cloud, please take care. You are Yutong's sky. Following Fu Baogua's military order, Yutong's eastern frontline army retreated in unison. There was not a hint of chaos in their movements. Amidst their movements, they roared in unison, Lord Supreme Cloud will win. Lord Supreme Cloud will win. Hundreds of thousands of people cheered in unison, their voices surging into the sky and tearing the clouds apart. The sky changed color as the wind blew and the clouds surged. Yin Yang strolled leisurely into the mountain gate of Mount Tianxian, stepping onto the winding path that had appeared countless times in his dreams. Even the moss on the rocks was so familiar to his eyes. Yin Yang plucked a stalk of grass from the side of the road and placed it before his eyes. There were faint red patterns on the stalk of grass, as if the blood of his brothers that day had not completely dissipated but had merged into the grass and trees of this mountain. I'm here. Yin Yang said softly, this grudge has been going on for almost 3 years. Brothers, are you all impatient from waiting? A faint voice rang out slowly, are your brothers impatient from waiting for Lord Supreme Cloud to descend to the underworld to ask them personally? But we are indeed impatient from waiting. Chapter 8:26. You don't have to be so careful. Even if I'm going to die today, Mr. Nian will definitely wait for me to finish talking before he starts the ambush. Because there are some things that have puzzled him for a long time, and he desperately wants to know the answer. Ji Lingxi nodded, but it was still difficult to dispel her anxiety. Knowing that there were endless dangers ahead, how could he really relax? How big of a heart did he have to have? As she ascended the mountain step by step, an indescribable sense of oppression seemed to have been built in the air for a long time. It made him feel inexplicably uncomfortable. This is the spirit restraining array. Yin Yang explained with interest as he walked, this is the Four Seasons Tower's usual tactic. Back then, they used the spirit restraining array to seal off our ability to transform to the greatest extent, so we could only use our physical strength to fight them. That was also the reason for our tragedy. Yin Yang's voice was unusually calm as he spoke plainly, without the slightest hint of emotion. Ji Lingxi asked worriedly, huh? Then, can you still? Yin Yang smiled and said, it doesn't matter whether I can or not. I'm no longer the person I used to be. They can't do anything to me. Both sides scoffed at the same time, obviously disdainful of what Yin Yang had said. Yin Yang ignored the jeers and continued to ascend the mountain slowly, as steady as ever. In spite of this, the murderous intent and malicious intent from both sides came crashing in waves. It was obvious that the Four Seasons Tower's experts wanted to use this opportunity to frustrate Yin Yang. They wanted Yin Yang to lose his edge before meeting Mr. Nian. However, Yin Yang was unperturbed, ignoring it as if he did not see it. Along the way, he acted like he was on a sightseeing tour. He climbed up the mountain at the speed of an ordinary person, leisurely and carefree. The Temple of Nine Supremes. Yin Yang suddenly realized that the 9 statues that had been destroyed in the previous battle had been reconstructed, looking just like before. A total of 9 statues stood majestically and solemnly in the Temple of Nine Supremes. It was the image of 9 masked men in black. Ji Lingxi lifted her head and focused her gaze on the last 2 statues. Behind each of the 2 masked statues was a cloud that seemed to be flying rapidly. It was the image of wind and cloud. Their masters were naturally supreme wind and cloud. In the main hall, a tea table had already been set up. There was only a man in cyan sitting peacefully in the seat with his head lowered, concentrating on brewing tea. The fragrance of tea wafted into the air, and the way this man brewed tea was as smooth as flowing water. The whole process was extremely natural, making the spectators feel extremely comfortable. It was as if just watching him brew tea was already a great visual pleasure. Yin Yang smiled and said, "This Mr. Nian can't be a fake anymore, can he? His true body has descended." The man in green lifted his head and said with a smile, "Lord Supreme Cloud has met me personally. Why should this reputed one conceal myself and make a fool out of myself?" This person's appearance was thin, his hair was slightly gray, and there seemed to be countless clouds flashing through his eyes. He looked like he was floating in the air, and his temperament was extraordinary. Looking at him, one could not help but have a good impression of him. He was indeed a good face. This face was very familiar. Yin Yang nodded and said, "As I expected, Feng Xianga." Mr. Nian smiled. "Lord Supreme Cloud's foresight is miraculous. You've never let down the title of Supreme Wit. Naturally, you won't be wrong." "That's right, the god of wine, Feng Xianga, is the identity I used most often when I roamed the martial world in the past." He smiled amiably. "I wonder if Lord Supreme Cloud is satisfied with the fine wine that I've kept in my collection?" Yin Yang laughed and said, "The taste is not bad indeed. It truly lives up to the title of being unparalleled. It's a pity that there's too little of it. It's not a great deed." Mr. Nian guffawed. "I've given you all of my life's treasures. I didn't even keep a pot for myself, yet you're complaining that it's too little. How good should a great deed be? It's beyond my reach, and I'm powerless." Yin Yang sat down slowly and gestured for Ji Lingxi to take a seat with him. Then, he looked at Mr. Nian with interest and said, "The god of wine's brewing is indeed unparalleled, but how about this tea?" "If Heaven's Inquisition were here, he would know best," Mr. Nian said. Yin Yang smiled faintly. "There's no need for us to beat around the bush anymore. Heaven's Inquisition has already gone to the bound of universe. He's no longer in Tianxian." Mr. Nian sighed. "We've been friends for a lifetime, yet we've unintentionally parted ways. I wonder if I'll have the chance to meet him again when I've gone to the bound of universe." He picked up the teapot and poured tea for Yun Yang and Ji Lingxi. He smiled and said, "In this world, before you, there was only one person who could make me brew tea with my own hands, Gu Chaoyang. Now, there's you. Oh, there's this young lady as well. Of course, it's my honor to be able to serve tea to Lord Supreme Cloud, whom the world worships as a god." Yin Yang picked up the teacup and took a sip. His eyes brightened as he exclaimed, "Great tea." Mr. Nian laughed. "Of course it's great tea. This tea was made when I went to the 9 mountains, crossed the 9 levels, crossed the 9 heavenly rivers, and collected snow lotuses of 9 different colors from the 9 snowy peaks. Before the snow lotuses bloomed, I took only the closed petal of each lotus and soaked it in the water of the 9 underworlds for 9 days and nights. Then, 9 virgins in their prime stirred the clouds of the 9 heavens and dried them within 9 breaths with the mystical qi of pure yin." He chuckled softly. "I dare say that I'm the only one in this world who has this tea, and it only costs 9 taels and 9 copper coins." Yin Yang asked cautiously, "May I know the name of this tea?" Mr. Nian smiled and said, "This tea is called Tea of 9 Supremes." Yin Yang clapped his hands and laughed. "Good name. The tea is good, but the name is even better." Mr. Nian squinted his eyes and said, "Indeed, the name is better. Every time I drink this tea, I treasure it very much, not daring to miss a single drop. When I taste the tea, it's like I'm savoring the process of mixing the 9 Supremes into this cup of tea and drinking it. I like this feeling from the bottom of my heart." Yin Yang smiled and said, "Is that so? It's a pity that I have a completely different understanding." Mr. Nian said, "Oh? Please enlighten me, Lord Supreme Cloud." Yin Yang said, my understanding is very simple. The so-called Four Seasons Tower, the so-called Mr. Nian, have put in so much effort to create this exquisite tea, yet they insist on calling it Nine Supremes. This makes me feel that Mr. Nian seems to be the tea farmer of the Nine Supremes. To please the master, you're willing to go to any lengths. You live up to your name. Mr. Nian stared at Yunyang. After a long while, he smiled faintly and said, "Every time I drink this tea, I'm very careful with the amount of tea I drink, because I'm afraid that I'll never be able to taste it again if I finish it. Since a year ago, I've stopped drinking this tea. This is because there's only one steeping left. I want to keep this steeping and drink it with the Nine Supremes. Only then will I not let this tea down." Chapter 827. It's already too many for the Nine Supremes to drink the Nine Supremes tea once, so there's really no need for the tea farmer to exist anymore. Since the tea farmer is destined to cease to exist, no one can make the Nine Supremes tea anymore. Is this what you mean, sir? He sighed with melancholy. Speaking of which, this tea farmer has really put in a lot of effort. Years of hard work has been consumed in a single gulp, and it's no longer of use. It's really hopeless. I can't help but think of the servants of a wealthy family. They've spent so much effort to flatter their master, but they're not pleased. It's a tragedy to live to this point. Mr. Nian shook his head with a smile. I've tested you. I can't anger you. Likewise. I'm sincerely impressed by your strong composure, Mr. Nian, said Yunyang. If so, let's get straight to the point. I've been beating around the bush too much in this life. I prefer to be straightforward instead. I've never liked to beat around the bush, said Yunyang. Ji Lingxi was dumbfounded as she listened. Both of you have been beating around the bush, scolding each other until your mouths are dry, and I'm confused, but now you're saying in unison that you don't like to beat around the bush. I'm impressed by the thickness of your skin. If you're so thick-skinned, you might as well go straight to heaven. The aroma of tea wafted in the air. Both of them sat facing each other from afar, a faint smile on their faces, their demeanor relaxed and dignified. If Ji Lingxi did not know that there was an unresolvable blood feud between them, she would have thought that they were actually a pair of best friends who were leisurely chatting over tea. The Four Seasons Tower is detached from worldly affairs. For thousands of years, it's been known as the top in the world, peerless. Yunyang said, in fact, before the last time at Tianshan Cliff, us Nine Supremes brothers had heard of the Four Seasons Tower. We even respected and admired it. At least, compared to the so-called School of Kismet State, it was a far cry. To us at that time, the Four Seasons Tower's renowned and domineering Tianquan's martial power was our dream. Yunyang sighed softly. But, we never expected it. It was actually the Four Seasons Tower who had set up a death trap for us. Even until now, when I've dug out almost everyone in the Four Seasons Tower, I still don't know what the reason is that has caused our stance to be so firm and resolute. He raised his head to look at Mr. Nian and asked with a smile, I wonder if Mr. Nian can clear up my doubts. Mr. Nian's expression did not change. He gently blew at the foam on his tea and said, Do you have any other questions, Lord Supreme Cloud? Why don't you ask them all at once? I will do my best to answer them. Of course there are. When I escaped death that day, I started to take revenge. Ever since I took my revenge, I felt that I had to be careful with every step I took. Every time I thought about it, I was careful and meticulous. When I finally found the Four Seasons Tower's men from the Sea of People, I was also worried that the Four Seasons Tower's retaliation would come at any time while I was happy and proud. However, I have yet to see the Four Seasons Tower's Supreme Lord Springfrost taking his revenge in the truest sense. Although the Four Seasons Tower has sent out a lot of men from the lowest to the highest ranks in the process of my targeting of the Four Seasons Tower's forces, the Four Seasons Tower has sent out a lot of manpower. When it comes to being a threat to me, it's completely out of the question. It's also because of this that the doubts in my heart grew. Yunyang said, later on, I had a feeling that other than those people who were captured by me in the beginning, those who came to the 5 venerable lords were actually released by the 4 Seasons Tower's higher-ups for me to kill. This feeling was even more obvious when it came to the civil and martial ministers. As for Xia, Qiu, and Dong, it could be said that they had given me the name list directly. Although it was faked by Wu Ying, it was still illogical. The 4 Seasons Tower has been renowned in Tianxian for countless years. How could they have overlooked this? May I ask why? Yin Yang asked faintly. Mr. Nian smiled faintly as he poured tea, not saying a word. First, you sowed an eternal grudge with us, the 9 Supremes, and then you sent the 4 Seasons Tower's men, from the lowest to the highest, to my blade so that I could eliminate them one by one. Such self-destruction is baffling. Yin Yang said, I believe that you're not out of your mind. You must have some other important purpose. However, what I'm most helpless about now is that even though I know that you have an important purpose, I still can't let go of the people you've sent to me. I can only kill them one by one. However, with each person I kill, I feel that I'm one step closer to your ultimate goal. Your method of killing with a borrowed knife is truly impressive, but it's also infuriating at the same time. Today, we've agreed to a final battle. Since the final battle is imminent, it's time for these mysteries to be uncovered. Yin Yang said, I'm ashamed. I've always prided myself on my unparalleled wisdom and foresight, but I still haven't figured out the crux of the matter. Please enlighten me. Mr. Nian exhaled softly and said with a smile, not bad at all. There's indeed another reason for these things. Supreme Cloud's judgment of this tower's capability, purpose, and even self-awareness are extremely accurate. Supreme Cloud's reputation is well-deserved. The fundamental reason is beyond the realm of common sense. It's reasonable that Lord Supreme Cloud can't think of it and can't figure it out. It's expected. He looked at Yun Yang with a smile. Other than that? Is there anything else you'd like to ask? Yin Yang smiled. These 2 questions are enough. Next, it's time for you to ask. Mr. Nian said, that's right. I have a few questions to ask Supreme Cloud as well. What I'm most curious about is the residence of 9 Supreme's secret and how you managed to keep your identity a secret. If it weren't for the School of Kismet State's unexpected intervention, I'm afraid I'd still be in the dark. I wouldn't have known that Lord Supreme Cloud's true self has long been exposed to the world and that you've had many dealings with my tower's people. He chuckled and said, just like what Lord Supreme Cloud has said, after today's battle, either the 4 Seasons Tower will vanish from the martial world forever, or Lord Supreme Cloud will rest eternally in the ground. At this point, there's really no secret that can't be shared. Yin Yang said, I'd like to hear the details. Mr. Nian smiled. It looks like Lord Supreme Cloud wants me to speak first. Yin Yang replied faintly, because I'm the one who asked first. It's only right that I get the answer first. Mr. Nian guffawed, not at all offended by Yun Yang's words. He was silent for a moment, as if he was arranging his thoughts. After a long while, he looked at the lingering aroma of tea and spoke slowly. The 4 Seasons Tower has been passed down for so many years, but this is the first time it's been forced into such a perilous situation. Although I've done all of this on purpose, it can also be considered as heaven's will. Or perhaps, heaven's will and man's cooperation. The root of the matter will probably start from when I obtained the 4 Seasons Tower's legacy. There's yin and yang in the sky, and the 4 seasons in a year. Mr. Nian said, I was 18 years old that year. I was one of the 5 supreme disciples of the 4 Seasons Tower. Yin Yang thought to himself, the 4 Seasons Tower is truly an oddity. They actually have as many as 5 supreme disciples. Chapter 828. Mr. Nian's expression was tinged with nostalgia. There's no need to think too much about it. One of the 5 leading disciples would definitely inherit Mr. Nian's position, but the other 4 would also enjoy glory and power. There wouldn't be too many grudges. This is the 4 Seasons Tower's tradition. Back then, my master was already close to 3,000 years old. He was already at the end of his rope and could pass away at any time. He gave us a task and asked us to do it. Those who could do it would be the next leader of the Four Seasons Tower, while the four who couldn't were spring, summer, autumn, and winter. This was the structure of the Four Seasons Tower's highest level. You should be able to relate it now. In fact, all the leaders of the Four Seasons Tower have the surname Nian, or should I say, Mr. Nian. Mr. Nian said faintly, as for my real name, it's Feng Xiang'a. This is my real name. The task that my master entrusted to me isn't new. It's the unchanging, ultimate goal that the Four Seasons Tower has been searching for, the location of God's Gate. Mr. Nian chuckled bitterly. I believe that Lord Supreme Cloud has learned about God's bone from the three venerable ones. However, there's still a great secret about God's grave. Every 365 years, the grave of God will change its location. In other words, we'll need to locate it again and confirm its location. This is where the mission lies. In that mission, I was the first to find the grave and became the Four Seasons Tower's new Mr. Nian. What's more, when I was searching for the God's Gate, I coincidentally encountered the shift of the stars. I stuck a divine weapon at the Stargate, but it accidentally caused the God's grave's location to be permanently fixed. It would never move again. Since then, I've contributed greatly to the Four Seasons Tower, and the position of the sect leader was no longer in doubt. However, it was then that I truly understood the Four Seasons Tower's true mission, or rather, where the Four Seasons Tower's survival was at stake. God's bone has mystical effects and immense power, but once it's obtained, it can't be stopped. Once it's stopped, one will suffer the backlash of the God's bone's spiritual power. Unfortunately, there's a limit to how much God's bone can be obtained. Countless seniors of the Four Seasons Tower have perished at this point. After the God's bone was fixed, I asked for the Patriarch's will and studied it over and over again. However, I focused my attention on one sentence. When the 9 stars shine on the sun, I will either soar to the 9 heavens or sink into oblivion for all eternity. Mr. Nian looked at Yun Yang with a rather complicated gaze. When the 9 stars shone, the residents of 9 Supremes appeared in the Tianxian continent. From that moment onwards, the Four Seasons Tower's opposition to all of you has become a foregone conclusion. If the Four Seasons Tower doesn't want to sink into oblivion forever, it has to stop the 9 Supremes soaring into the 9 heavens. Yin Yang could not help sighing. This was truly an undeserved calamity. However, the first master of the Four Seasons Tower was truly remarkable. He had actually left such a message a few thousand years ago. If there's a choice, who wouldn't want to live a carefree life and embark on the path of cultivation in peace? However, when the 9 stars shine, the residence of 9 Supremes really emerges. Is everything fated, or is this how it should be? Mr. Nian's voice was filled with a sigh. Since the prophecy of the 9 stars has come true, then the two outcomes of soaring into the 9 heavens or sinking into oblivion for eternity are inevitable. Mr. Nian said faintly, however, since such a prophecy exists, there must be a reason behind it. Everything in this world has a cause and effect, and vice versa. Therefore, I've tried to find the reason. If I can find the reason, or perhaps I've found a variable that can affect or interfere with this destined outcome, allowing it to be beneficial to us as much as possible. With this as the starting point, I've deduced the subsequent events. The first thing I've foreseen is undoubtedly the appearance of the 9 stars. The impact is immense. It could be a crisis for the Four Seasons Tower, but it could also be an opportunity. As long as I can seize this opportunity, I can naturally avoid sinking into oblivion for eternity. Lord Supreme Cloud, from what you see, does my understanding make sense? Mr. Nian asked. Yin Yang sighed and said, you're right. If it were me, I'd definitely understand it the same way. Perhaps everyone understood the saying that danger was accompanied by opportunity. In spite of this, there were very few people who truly understood what to do and how to deal with the crisis when it came. However, it was obvious that the Four Seasons Tower and Mr. Nian had chosen the most correct and proactive approach. Hence, there was the Battle of Mount Tianxian and the 9 Supremes Elegy. Based on this starting point, the residents of 9 Supremes appeared after the 9 stars. I didn't make a move because I wasn't clear about the latter half of the prophecy then. Acting blindly would only be futile. However, when the 9 Supremes appeared one after another, it showed who the 9 dragons belonged to. As the 9 Supremes developed step by step, the providence that the Four Seasons Tower had accumulated over the years showed signs of gradually disintegrating and disappearing. With such proof, there was no longer any doubt. Even then, I still didn't have the thought of destroying the 9 Supremes because I hadn't found the root of the problem. I wasn't clear about the root of this prophecy, so I forced myself to act. Even if I destroyed the 9 Supremes, I was still a puppet in the prophecy, acting according to the prophecy's trajectory. As I continued to analyze and research in detail, I finally confirmed that the Four Seasons Tower's providence was actually linked to God's grave. Yet, the providence of God's grave and the residence of 9 Supremes were mutually reinforcing and counteracting each other. In other words, the stronger the residence of 9 Supremes was, the weaker the God's grave would be, and vice versa. After confirming this, we made many attempts in secret, such as using various techniques to guide and release the providence of the 9 Supremes, or even forcefully plundering it. However, what made us feel helpless and powerless was that the providence of the residence of 9 Supremes could not be absorbed at all. Both sides would only grow stronger while the other would gradually weaken. It was difficult for external forces to interfere. Left with no other choice, we could only use the most ruthless method, to annihilate the residence of 9 Supremes. So, from then on, I sent people one after another to attack the residence of 9 Supremes in the most direct way. Yin Yang heaved a long sigh. I see. This is the truth. Back when the residence of 9 Supremes was founded and the 9 Supremes had just been formed, the residence of 9 Supremes had suffered wave after wave of attacks, wanting to wipe the residence of 9 Supremes off the face of this world. The strength of the incoming attacks was extremely high. However, without exception, they were all devoured by the energy of the residence of 9 Supremes. Those who came to attack the residence of 9 Supremes died from the backlash. It was the same, regardless of the level. Therefore, Yin Yang and the others had no idea what level these invading enemies were. Since they were all dead, there was no point in dwelling on it. Moreover, there was no room for them to dwell on it even if they wanted to, because those who had been devoured had all died a horrible death. They could not even be recognized. It turned out that those people were from the Four Seasons Tower. The battle between the 9 Supremes and the Four Seasons Tower had actually begun a long time ago. It was just that one side had been unaware of it all along. After 3 consecutive waves of probing, all those who attacked died from the backlash. These 3 waves of people were handpicked by me. The first wave was at the level of Grandmaster. The second wave was at the level of the 5 Venerable Lords. The third wave was only 2 people, but they were already at the pinnacle of this world, just slightly weaker than me. Not only did these 3 waves of combat power fail to destroy the residence of 9 Supremes, they died from the backlash. This further proved that the residence of 9 Supremes is indestructible. Mr. Nyen said, since the residence of 9 Supremes can't be destroyed, the only way to achieve an outcome beneficial to the Four Seasons Tower is to destroy the 9 Supremes. However, I have to say that the secrecy of the 9 Supremes members is indeed impressive. There's no oversight at all. Mr. Nyen sighed. Even I couldn't find out the identity of the 9 Supremes even after exhausting all my means. I couldn't even get a hold of the 9 Supremes' basic movements. The 9 Supremes have contributed greatly to Yutong. The 9 Supremes who have appeared on Yutong's battlefield many times are not controlled by imperial authority, nor are they monitored by the Board of War, the Board of Appointments, or any other Yutong department. I can't believe such a strange thing would actually happen. Left with no other choice, I began to plan for the Four Seasons Tower's manpower to infiltrate Yutong. It was a more comprehensive and indiscriminate infiltration than before. However, during this process, there was a new change in providence, an extremely bizarre change. Such a change has never happened in the Four Seasons Tower's 10,000 years of existence. Today's episode is even better. I've reached the crucial plot. Chapter 829. At this point, Mr. Nyen could not help but sigh. Initially, according to my estimation, as the Four Seasons Tower's men infiltrate deeper into Yutong, it would definitely affect the 9 Supremes even more. However, the reality is that as the Four Seasons Tower's men infiltrate Yutong, the 9 Supremes' providence grows stronger. Such a strange thing makes me feel even more helpless. This situation proves that no matter who I send over, it's Yutong's national power that will ultimately increase the 9 Supremes' providence. Even if that person is a spy and his original intention is to harm Yutong, the result is the complete opposite. Mr. Nyen said, the Four Seasons Tower's providence is inevitably weakening bit by bit. However, God's grave is getting easier to enter following my setup. Conversely, it's getting easier to obtain God's bones. This proves that my setup is effective. Therefore, the crux of the matter has shifted to whether we can eradicate the 9 Supremes and end the possibility of the dragon ascending to the 9 heavens. Mr. Nyen said faintly, speaking of which, with Lord Supreme Cloud's wisdom, you should already understand the whole story, right? Yin Yang replied, yes, I do understand. I understand everything. Mr. Nyen chuckled bitterly. Unfortunately, things don't end here. At least, it's not enough. I've collaborated with Dongxian to plan the battle at Tianxian Cliff. Dongxian sent out its army to oppress the 9 Supremes, forcing them to lend a hand. I've mobilized all the informants and received news of the 9 Supremes along the way. In the end, your Tianxian Cliff ambushed Dongxian because you fell into our trap. Lord Supreme Cloud is involved in all of this. I won't go into details. It was after that battle that the 8 Supremes were annihilated and only Supreme Cloud was lucky enough to survive. The Four Seasons Tower's providence suddenly underwent a drastic change. It skyrocketed in a straight line. Compared to when it was at its peak in the past, it's several times better. Mr. Nyen said faintly, since then, the Four Seasons Tower's men's cultivation base and providence have all been growing. Only, the men sent to provoke you won't have the same providence. The only one left, Supreme Cloud, hasn't been found, so we can't do our best. Yin Yang was hit with a sudden realization. So, the reason why you keep exposing these people is so that I can help you get rid of these people so that their providence can return to the Four Seasons Tower and prevent your own providence from leaking away? Of course, that's not all. My bigger plan is to follow the clues and find out who this Supreme Cloud who has been in hiding for a long time is, once and for all. It's too bad that Lord Supreme Cloud is too cautious. On the contrary, after these people's karmic luck returns, the others in the tower will benefit even more. It was especially useful for nourishing the godly bones. Through the circulation of the power of providence, the godly bones could fuse with the human body to a greater extent. I've come to a conclusion. As long as there's a sufficient amount of providence, even if it's all 12 gods' bones, they'll all be transferred to the Four Seasons Tower one day. Yin Yang frowned and said, I don't understand. It's not that I don't understand what you're saying, but it's hard to make sense of it. Mr. Nyen chuckled humorlessly. I don't understand this either. Those who died were the Four Seasons Tower's men. Why is it that after they went to Yutong, even if they were disloyal, even if they were traitors, even if they brought calamity to the nation and the people, would they still be integrated into Yutong's providence? Or is it that after these people were tainted by the providence over there, the providence could still return to the Four Seasons Tower after their deaths and still have such an effect? This is even more incomprehensible to me. Mr. Nyen said in a low voice, in the end, I attributed it to the residence of 9 Supremes' marvelous mystery. Perhaps, this is an opportunity or an evolution of opportunity. Yin Yang exhaled softly and murmured, the Four Seasons Tower is against us for this reason. Now, I finally understand everything. Mr. Nyen smiled. You still only understand half of it. As for the other half, if you win today's battle and enter God's grave, you'll naturally know. However, if you lose, there's nothing more to say. Mr. Nyen sat up straight and looked at Yin Yang. Now, it's my turn to ask questions. Yin Yang replied faintly, please speak. I'll try my best to tell you everything I know. Before the battle of life and death, to have a heart-to-heart talk with my greatest enemy, to you and to me, I have no regrets in life or death. Mr. Nyen chuckled. First of all, how was Supreme Cloud's identity kept a secret? Whether it was before or after the battle at Tianshan Cliff, we've tried our best to investigate the background and identity of the 9 Supremes, but we've never found anything. Especially after that battle, if it weren't for the fact that the 9 Supremes' providence still remained and even grew strong again, I would have misjudged that the 9 Supremes had been completely eradicated. Supreme Cloud, Yun Yang, can be said to be the person who has dealt with the 4 Seasons Tower the most among the people of Yutong. It's truly remarkable that Supreme Cloud could do it without leaving a trace. Secondly, what mysteries lie within the residence of 9 Supremes? Or should I say, what are the secrets of the residence of 9 Supremes? To this day, there shouldn't be any more questions about keeping it a secret. Yin Yang replied faintly, is that all Mr. Nyen's questions? These 2 questions are essentially the same. Oh? Mr. Nyen asked. Yin Yang continued, actually, Supreme Cloud has never been invisible to the 4 Seasons Tower. He's always been ostentatious. Mr. Nyen chuckled humorlessly. It's because of what you've said that we're in such dire straits today. After the battle at Tianshan Cliff, I noticed that the 9 Supremes' providence was weak, but it wasn't extinguished. When I asked Gu Chaoyang, I found out that someone among the 9 Supremes had actually escaped death and survived the ordeal. Following the guidance of the Providence, we've confirmed your location to be in Tiantang City. We've observed almost everyone in Tiantang City and we've rarely missed anyone, including you. Mr. Nyen was obviously baffled by the initial judgment. He paused for a moment before continuing, in fact, you, young Master Yun, who has a reputation in Tiantang City but an extremely shallow cultivation base, were among the first batch to be eliminated. Yun Yang coughed, not knowing whether to laugh or cry at Mr. Nyen's words. He had never expected himself to be among the first batch of suspects to be eliminated from the 4 Seasons Tower's intelligence system. How did such a divine logic come about? Having a bad reputation and being a popinjay was not the best way to conceal one's identity. This was no longer a mistake of being blind under the lamp. The 4 Seasons Tower has indeed made a huge misjudgment in this matter. Mr. Nyen sighed. If it wasn't so, you wouldn't have been able to turn things around so easily. Perhaps, this whole thing would have ended a long time ago, turning into a completely different situation. During the first wave of investigation, the famous young masters in Tiantang City, the young masters of the spring, summer, autumn, and winter families, as well as the head of Yutong's popinjays, good-for-nothing, great young Master Yun, were indeed eliminated at the first instance. Back then, Supreme Lord Springfrost was personally in charge of the investigation, personally coming up with the first elimination list. Sigh. You, good-for-nothing young Master Yun Yang, were ranked first in this list. In other words, in He Hanqing's eyes back then, you were the most unlikely person to be Supreme Cloud. Looking at it now, such a decision isn't just laughable. It's an insane decision. Recommending a book, The Emperor. Those who are interested, go read it. On the other hand, you credited Ling Xiaozui for the huge improvement in your cultivation base. After all, with Ling Xiaozui's ability, it wouldn't be strange for your ability to improve tremendously in a short amount of time if he were to be close to you. On the contrary, it's only natural. Now that I think about it, Ling Xiaozui's ability is unfathomable, but his wealth is very limited. It's not easy to groom a young expert in such a short amount of time. It's a shame that the 4 Seasons Tower was blind, completely ignoring such a huge flaw. Instead, they found excuses for all of you and let it go, coming to such a logical conclusion. It really makes me feel helpless. After that, your name appeared several times in my line of sight, like the battle between the 4 Venerable Ones and the battle between you and the boy from the other world, like how you rushed to the Fortress of Resilience alone to provide aid. Everything is still vivid in my mind, but I always missed it because of such a reason. If time could be reversed, I would kill Supreme Lord Springfrost, He Han Qing, 100 times over with my own hands. Mr. Nian smiled faintly, but the menacing meaning in his words was clear. He lifted his head to look at He Han Qing. An investigation like this is equivalent to He Han Qing sending the entire Four Seasons Tower's power to your butcher's knife. Otherwise, everything would have ended a long time ago. Yin Yang said leisurely, if time could be reversed, I would definitely have a drink with old Master Wenzong. He has protected Yutong his entire life, sparing no effort in doing so. Mr. Nian chuckled coldly. He was so choked by the words that he almost did not want to continue. Of course, there's another point that leaves no room for doubt on your side. You've never shown any signs of anyone obeying your orders. As everyone knows, the 9 Supremes have to mobilize the 9 Heavens Dictum's power, but that mysterious force has obviously made a move. This proves that Supreme Cloud has been manipulating its movements all along, proving your innocence. However, every time it makes a move, you, Yun Yang, have done nothing at all. You haven't even seen a stranger. Come to think of it, this must be another layer of concealment that you've prepared. Regarding this, Mr. Nian has overestimated me. It's a pity that Mr. Nian has never entered the residence of 9 Supremes. Yin Yang said faintly, there's a strange existence called the 9 Heavens Dictum in the residence of 9 Supremes. This is the key that allows me to control the force that the 9 Heavens Dictum belongs to. Mr. Nian's expression turned serious. Oh. The 9 Heavens Dictum is the name of the organization under the 9 Supremes that everyone knows. However, to me, it's a token. Through this token, I can command the 9 Heavens Dictum to do anything, even from thousands of miles away. Yin Yang said slowly, therefore, judging whether I'm Supreme Cloud or not based on my connection with the 9 Heavens Dictum, the answer is destined to be wrong. This has been a false proposition from the very beginning. It's a pity that it's not a crime of war. Mr. Nian's expression, which had been calm since the beginning of the conversation, finally changed. There's actually such a thing? There's actually such a magical thing in this world? Yin Yang smiled. Perhaps Mr. Nian doesn't believe it, but the truth is, even the people under the 9 Heavens Dictum don't know who Supreme Cloud is or who Supreme Cloud's true identity is. From the beginning to the end, there's only one thing that can be confirmed, other than the 9 Supremes' unique cultivation method, no one else can use the 9 Heavens Dictum to send messages. Therefore, the one who sent the message must be one of the 9 Supremes. Mr. Nian was stunned for a long time before he finally chuckled bitterly. I see. It's not too unjust for the Four Seasons Tower to lose the intelligence war. It's indeed a crime of war. Yin Yang smiled faintly and did not comment further. Mr. Nian's meaning was clear. In this era where fast horses and flying birds were still required to send messages, something that defied common sense and could be transmitted thousands of miles away had actually appeared. While everyone was staring at the communication channel, someone else had completed his task from tens of thousands of miles away. It would be strange if he did not lose under such circumstances. This is one of the core secrets of the residence of 9 Supremes. Yin Yang said, does Mr. Nian want to know any other secrets of the residence of 9 Supremes? Mr. Nian sighed softly. If Lord Supreme Cloud is willing to tell me, of course, I'm more than willing to listen and broaden my horizons. Looking at the graceful Mr. Nian, Yin Yang sighed softly and said, Sir, your demeanor and bearing are indeed extraordinary. It reminds me of a saying. Mr. Nian smiled faintly. You are a beauty, but why have you become a thief? That's right, that's right. Sir, you know me well. Mr. Nian smiled and said, what is an official? What is a thief? Yin Yang was silent. Finally, he smiled. Yes. We are friends of life and death because our standpoints are different. That's right. We are friends of life and death because our standpoints are different. Mr. Nian sighed softly. Chapter 831. Lord Supreme Cloud's explanation has enlightened me, but it's this friendship of life and death that has won me over. Mr. Nian smiled. Since we're friends of life and death, we should fight to the death today to end this battle of destiny. If so, why don't you tell me more about the residence of 9 supreme secrets, Lord Supreme Cloud? I've lived my entire life and I've seen many things, but this is the first time I've encountered something so strange. Yin Yang flashed a mocking smile and said, the secret of the residence of 9 supremes belongs only to the 9 supremes. To put it more bluntly, I've mentioned the truth just now. Only the unique cultivation method of the 9 supremes can activate the secret hidden in the residence of 9 supremes. Other than the 9 of us, no one else possesses the cultivation method of the 9 supremes. Therefore, it's useless for Mr. Nian to know about the residence of 9 supreme secrets, it'll only add to your troubles. There are too many mysteries in this world that are beyond everyone's knowledge. What's the point of forcing it, especially now that the residence of 9 supremes has disappeared? Mr. Nian's expression changed for the first time. Disappeared? Wasn't it concealed by Lord Supreme Cloud using a secret art and not revealed to anyone? Yin Yang smiled and said, I know that Mr. Nian has always coveted the residence of 9 supremes. But now, it's already too late. Too late? Mr. Nian asked in a daze. Yin Yang answered with certainty, it is indeed too late. The residence of 9 supremes' destiny has come to an end. Such a divine artifact shouldn't stay in the secular world, should it? Besides, our paths are different. Mr. Nian smiled and murmured, different paths, we can't work together. Yin Yang said, that's about the residence of 9 supreme secrets. There's no use in knowing more. It'll only disturb you. Mr. Nian's gaze was cold as he said faintly, no matter what, I've finally solved the greatest mystery that's been in my heart for a long time. I have to thank Lord Supreme Cloud. The 9 supremes dictum. What a dictum of 9 supremes. Yin Yang picked up the teacup and took a sip. The tea is not bad, he said faintly. Mr. Nian was silent for a moment before he said, it's a pity that the tea is already cold. Yin Yang smirked coldly and said, the words have been spoken and the tea has turned cold. Man proposes, but God disposes. God's will is always toying with us. Mr. Nian smiled. Lord Supreme Cloud, I thought you should be brimming with confidence when you took the initiative to propose this challenge. Why are you talking about fate here? With the current situation, it's almost certain that Lord Supreme Cloud has come to this duel of life and death with only 2 people. I don't know if he's blindly believing in heaven's will or if he's underestimating the 4 Seasons Tower. Yin Yang's eyes were half-lidded as he said, if Mr. Nian didn't believe in heaven's will, why did he imprison Gu Chaoyang for so many years? During the battle at Tianxian Cliff that day, the 9 supremes weren't annihilated. Heaven's will has long been clear. This worldly matter, right and wrong, gratitude and resentment will be dealt with from the beginning. It's only right and proper. Mr. Nian replied indifferently, I've understood Lord Supreme White Cloud's intentions since we first met, and it's even more so now. Lord Supreme Cloud is indeed loyal to the country and the people. He is the #1 hero in the world. The so-called heroes are nothing more than this. It's a pity that the 9 supreme tea is gone from this world. Mr. Nian sighed with melancholy. The 9 supremes will cease to exist in this world as well. What a pity. With his arms behind his back, he walked out slowly and said leisurely, Supreme Cloud, there are all the 4 Seasons Tower's top-notch elites on this cliff now. A total of 12 inheritors of God's bone, the 4 Seasons Tower's brothers for the 12th month. Other than that, there are also the 4 Seasons messengers of spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And me, the leader of the 4 Seasons, Nian. The 29 people here are the 4 Seasons Tower's pinnacle combat power, their ultimate force. In other words, if you have the ability to kill all 29 of us here, then there will be no 4 Seasons Tower in the Tianxian continent from now on. Mr. Nian was already at the door. Yin Yang asked quietly, there won't be a 4 Seasons Tower in the Tianxian continent? Do you mean that there are other 4 Seasons Towers in other places? Mr. Nian chuckled softly. Perhaps, there really isn't. The bound of universe is a place that I've never set foot in. Yin Yang did not speak. Mr. Nian's form vanished like a drifting cloud at the door. Since the beginning of time, the 4 seasons of a year have existed forever. How can the 9 Supremes, who appeared by chance, compare to them? Supreme Cloud, focus on preparing for the battle. An hour later, we shall fight to the death and end our grudges. I have no confidence in this battle, but I believe that you, Lord Supreme Cloud, don't have absolute confidence either. However, when it comes to the final resolution, whether it's your soul that wanders into the abyss or my death, neither of us will have any regrets. If you behead me, I hope that you'll toast me and tell me your unspoken secret. If I behead you, I'll toast you as well. His voice faded away. The tea table, teapot, and teacups that were made of flawless jade in the room were abandoned by Mr. Nian just like that, as if they were worthless. Ji Lingxi had not uttered a single word throughout their conversation. It was only now, when she saw Mr. Nian leave and Yun Yang sit there in silence, that she could not help saying, "This Mr. Nian, if that's the case, he's worthy of being a dominating figure in the martial arts world. Whether he's good or bad in his actions aside, his demeanor and grace alone are already worthy of being called the pinnacle of this world." Yin Yang said in a low voice, "Which one of those who can stir up trouble in the martial world isn't a peerless talent? The 4 Seasons Tower has dominated Tianxuan's martial world for tens of thousands of years. Naturally, they've produced more talents. If Mr. Nian isn't exceptionally talented, how can he be qualified to lead the 4 Seasons Tower? At the end of the day, it's just a grudge caused by different standpoints. However, fate dictates that it's still an unsolvable topic. It's obvious that Mr. Nian and the 4 Seasons Tower must kill me in order to occupy God's grave completely and ascend to the position of God, an unparalleled achievement. I, on the other hand, must uproot the 4 Seasons Tower to avenge my 8 brothers." None of what Mr. Nian said today was a lie. Ji Lingxi said, "I've been monitoring this with the art of frozen heart and telepathy. There's no doubt about it." Yin Yang said quietly, "It's expected. Today's battle is a battle of life and death. So-called lies are completely useless at a time like this. Instead of forcefully contending with words, it's better to be sincere and respect this opponent of yours. Respect his own life and death as well. At this moment, he won't lie. Do you have a plan for how to fight after an hour? They have the advantage in numbers." "It's not a lie?" Ji Lingxi asked worriedly. Yin Yang chuckled. "What's the use of more people, let alone 29? Fighting until the last person fell was good enough. The reason why I suggested it and Mr. Nian agreed to it is to settle our grudges in the purest manner of the martial world. The final battle this time has to be settled in the martial world's way. The purest manner of the martial world is nothing more than battle and life and death." Chapter 832. An hour was neither short nor long. However, to Fu Baogua and the others who had been waiting below, this period of time felt like a year. An instant felt like a year. Every time the time it took to drink a cup of tea, an incense stick of time, or an instant passed, everyone's hearts were burning with anxiety. Lord Supreme Cloud had been up the mountain for a long time. It had been a long time, but why was there still no movement? What was the situation up there? No matter how confident they were in Lord Supreme Cloud, everyone was still extremely anxious. No one was an exception. Fu Baogua stood there, his anxiety evident. His usual composure and the demeanor of a great general were nowhere to be seen. His demeanor was like that of an ant on a hot pan. He paced back and forth, occasionally raising his head to look up at the mountain, sighing one after another. "How is it? Why is there no movement at all? Since it's a battle between the world's top cultivators, how can it be so silent? Has the battle not started, or is it already over? I heard that a battle between experts happens in the blink of an eye. Could it be, the generals at the side were also scratching their ears and cheeks? They were so anxious that they wanted to rush up the mountain right now to see what was going on. After a long, long time, Marshal. Why don't I go up the mountain to see what's going on? A general said anxiously, I really can't wait any longer. All right, just as Fu Baogua spoke, before his voice trailed off, all of a sudden, a long howl that shook the sky and shattered the void came from the top of the mountain, carrying with it an unparalleled murderous intent. Mr. Nian, come and fight. It's Lord Supreme Cloud's voice. Fu Baogua stood up excitedly when he heard the voice. The rest of the people's eyes shone as well. They had only heard the voice, but they were already trembling uncontrollably with excitement. Then, an equally violent sound rang out. It was as if a bolt of lightning had ignited a fire in the earth. In an instant, the earth shook and the mountains shook. Everyone was more than 30 miles away, but they could still clearly feel the violent tremors under their feet. Some of the soldiers were even shaken off the ground and fell to the ground again. At the same time, Yun Yang's voice rang out again, Fu Baogua, pull your men back another 30 miles. Yutong's iron-blooded soldiers can't be lost here for nothing. Orders must be obeyed. Fu Baogua's expression was unprecedentedly solemn. He stood up straight and said in a low voice, Yes, sir. Although he was far away and could not see the other party's image, Fu Baogua's actions made it seem like Supreme Cloud was right in front of him. He was as solemn as if he had just received an order. Retreat. Everyone, move. Quick. At that moment, the rumbling sounds from the top of the mountain finally started to ring out. The decisive battle had finally begun. When Yun Yang and Ji Lingxi stepped out of the Temple of Nine Supremes, there were 7 people standing in front of them. All 7 of them were wreathed in murderous intent. The person in the middle was dressed in an elegant green robe, like a bamboo in spring. He was tall and had a thin face, and he held a verdant flute in his hand. There were 6 people beside him, 3 of them were dressed in green, and the other 3 were dressed in yellow. Unlike the leader whose murderous intent was barely visible, these 6 people all wore cold expressions. Their hostility was evident as they pointed at Yun Yang. Lord Supreme Cloud, Spring of the Four Seasons Tower is here to learn from you. The leader in green spoke with a faint smile. His expression was relaxed, as if he had brought a group of good friends for a stroll in spring. How should I address you? Yun Yang asked. Lord Supreme Cloud, you can call me Spring. Spring smiled elegantly. As for the ones beside me, 3 of them are January, February, and March respectively. The other 3 are the Four Seasons Tower's 3 gods' envoys. Lord Supreme Cloud has conversed with our leader for a long time, so you should know who we are. Spring. 3 gods' envoys in 1 spring, 3 months. Is this the Four Seasons Tower's standard lineup for entertaining guests? Yun Yang smiled faintly and said, Let me learn from all of you. I want to see if the Four Seasons Tower's everlasting reputation is worthy of its name. Spring replied, I just want to learn from the renowned Lord Supreme Cloud's skills before the chief does. He smiled casually. I've fought with Lord Supreme Cloud in the dark for so long, but I've never had the chance to learn from you personally. If I were to attack you with all of my men, it would be too much of a disrespect to Lord Supreme Cloud. Yun Yang smiled. I understand. It was indeed understandable. Which one of these people was not a top-notch expert? Which one of these top-notch experts was not a proud and arrogant person? How could they be willing to abandon their identities and gang up on each other when they did not understand the other party's strength? Especially when the other party was just a small fry not long ago. All the more reason not to make a fuss about it. Lord Supreme Cloud, please. Spring smiled faintly, his demeanor dignified. Yun Yang smiled back. Please. At this moment, the purple chi in Yun Yang's deific consciousness space surged and billowed. Emmy's rare liveliness was nowhere to be seen. It stood quietly and solemnly, fully focused on helping Yun Yang, not daring to slack off. After all, this moment was the most direct reflection of life and death for Emmy. In his dantian, mystical chi was circulating at a high speed. Yin Yang's face was faintly suffused with purple chi. His right hand stretched out slowly, his fair and slender fingers stretched out in front of him. Chapter 833. This was because the moment Yun Yang's saber was swung out, it underwent a transformation that was beyond everyone's understanding under the watchful eyes of the crowd. The gleaming saber that was initially only 3 feet long suddenly underwent a transformation the moment it was about to slash downwards. It was a massive and shocking transformation. The moment the saber fell, it expanded into a giant saber that was 70 feet long. The slanted slash in the air suddenly transformed into a sweeping attack that enveloped all 7 men at the same time. Furthermore, the saber's edge that seemed to be deliberately going easy on the opponent had actually turned into lightning. The instantaneous increase in speed was more than 10 times. Each of the 4 Seasons Tower's men who were sent out to fight had a wealth of combat experience. They had been through more than 100 battles in their lifetime. However, even though these 7 men had lived for close to 10,000 years, they had never encountered such a bizarre situation. What he wielded was a saber, not a bolt of lightning in the sky that could be as long as it wanted to be. This was a transformation that exceeded the logic of any ordinary person. The saber light turned from a bolt of lightning into a murderous gleam that cut through the heaven and earth. January, February, and Moons, who bore the brunt of the attack, made a serious misjudgment of the sudden change in the situation. They almost didn't have any time to react. With a flash of light, they were all cut into 2 and died just like that. Their cultivation path was painted like a cake. Until the very last moment, their faces still carried a mocking smile towards the saber. Yin Yang had planned this attack before he acted, setting up the trap first. He did not hold back once he struck, killing 3 men consecutively when they least expected it. Even after successfully killing 3 men, the saber's momentum did not falter as it chased after the 4th man. The saber light plunged straight down. In fact, the 4th man had died because of the saber as well. It was just that when Yin Yang killed the 4th man, a loud clang was heard when the saber swept past the man's waist. It was as if the saber had struck an extremely sturdy piece of metal. Although the 4th man had died from the slash, the unparalleled momentum of the saber had to stop because of it. The saber did not belong to the human realm. When everyone reacted, some of it had already ended. Everything happened so suddenly. Only after a moment did blood soar into the sky. The smell of blood instantly assaulted the nostrils and swept through the surroundings. The remaining 3 men stared at Yun Yang in disbelief and then at the ground, their eyes reddened. It was only now that they realized just how murderous that slash was. But what followed was endless grief and indignation. They had been fighting side by side for so many years, but 4 of them had died in the blink of an eye under the other party's single slash. Moreover, it was done in such a strange way. Under the watchful eyes of everyone. How could the rest of them endure this? Despicable. Spring was no longer able to maintain his elegant demeanor, and he roared furiously, his eyes about to split open. Despicable? Is it really despicable? Yin Yang held the divine edge that had reverted to its original length and said in slight surprise, "This is the final battle. Any means should be used, any means should be used." This is a cliché. I'm used to reminding my enemies, enlightening them for the rest of their lives, so that they won't regret even in death. What I find strange is that you all know that the battle has already begun. Even though I struck first, you all could have dodged it. Why didn't you? Couldn't you wait to die? The 3 of them almost spat blood in anger at his words. Dodging? How could we? How could we dodge this strange attack that we had never dreamt of even 1,000 times in our lives? How could we dodge it? Reminding our enemies, enlightening them for the rest of their lives, so that they won't regret even in death? If you're so eloquent, why don't you just go to heaven and pretend to be a wise man in heaven and enlighten the masses? Fortunately, the 3 of them were experienced cultivators whose cultivation base and state of mind had reached the pinnacle. With a long howl of grief and indignation, they calmed themselves and launched a counterattack at the same time. Naturally, they turned into a triangular offensive formation, surrounding Yun Yang from 3 directions. A saber, a sword, and a flute, the sharp sound of the wind breaking rang through the peak, filling the eyes with ghostly shrieks. The divine edge that had reverted to its original size danced rapidly in Yun Yang's hand. The saber light changed and blocked the 3 of them. Although he was besieged, he did not retreat an inch. Yun Yang did not use saber truth, destiny blade to attack. How could he really reveal his trump card before the enemy appeared? However, the vigorous and abundant mystical chi made every slash of his saber filled with an unstoppable, domineering aura. Spring and the 2 envoys suppressed the extreme grief and indignation in their hearts and fought with all their might, wanting nothing more than to grind Yun Yang's bones into dust with a single strike. It was a pity that the 3 of them could only fight Yun Yang to a draw despite their combined efforts. Ji Lingxi stood on the side, watching the battle with rapt attention. Then, she heaved a soft sigh of relief. Yun Yang's first strike had caught the enemy off guard and killed more than half of the enemy's combat power. Now, he had even taken the initiative to control the battle. The current situation was not a problem at all. The so-called siege was more of Yun Yang's accumulation of power and preparation for the upcoming battle. After all, there were at least 22 superb experts hiding in the forest, waiting for a chance to strike. Since Yun Yang's side was safe, she would focus her attention on the ambushes that had yet to appear. It was better to be safe than sorry. At this time, Ji Lingxi was surprised to find that the corpse of the 4 Seasons Tower's divine envoy, who was dressed in yellow clothes, was glowing with a yellow light. The yellow light was mainly distributed in 2 places, one on the neck and the other on the waist. Ji Lingxi watched for a while longer and could not help but feel that something was amiss. Profound cultivators had different attributes in their cultivation methods. It was not surprising that the mystical chi that was condensed to protect or even attack was mixed with a unique glow. Water, fire, wind, and thunder each had their own hue. However, no matter how outstanding a cultivator was, once he died, his chi would dissipate and his cultivation method would vanish along with his life. Now that the divine envoy had been sliced into 2 by Yun Yang's saber and could not be more dead, why was his body still glowing? Ji Lingxi observed carefully and realized that it was definitely not the reflection of a weapon. It was really the glow of the dead body. Then, the question was, what was going on? It was very unusual. Ji Lingxi's heart skipped a beat. She extended her hand and made a grabbing motion, causing the corpse on the ground to fly towards her. Chapter 834. It was Mr. Nian, who had spoken to Yun Yang earlier. Before Ji Lingxi could speak, Mr. Nian had already vanished with the corpse in his arms. He did not seem to care about his 3 subordinates, who were locked in a bitter battle not far away and were in danger of being overturned at any moment. Yun Yang brandished his saber and forced Spring back 30 feet. He laughed and said, "Mr. Nian, so many people around here are just here to watch. Both sides are on the same page. A battle of life and death is bound to happen sooner or later. Why not come forward and have a good fight?" Mr. Nian's voice drifted over slowly. "In this final battle, I have to give you the respect you deserve as Supreme Cloud. It's hard to be fair when the martial world's grudges are settled. However, in this final battle of life and death that was initiated by Lord Supreme Cloud, not only do we have the advantage of setting up the spiritual restraining formation first, we also have the advantage of numbers. Let's create a relatively fair battle environment as a form of repayment." Yun Yang smiled faintly. "Fair? No matter how fair it is, it's still a battle of numbers. Why do you have to deceive yourself and deceive others? Such an act will only make others despise you even more." There was a hint of amusement in Mr. Nian's voice. "Whether we deceive ourselves or not depends on the person. Our main strategy in this battle is indeed to swarm forward and end this battle as soon as possible. However, Spring has volunteered to measure Supreme Cloud's worth first. As the leader, I have to fulfill this old official's wish and let him fight you with his own strategy. Life and death, no regrets. Yin Yang was moved. Even if we die because of this? The dead are gone. What about those who are lucky enough to survive? There are so many of you here, are you just going to watch? Mr. Nian's voice was indifferent. Life and death are the same. Even if we die because of this, it's a choice made by Spring and his subordinates. This is the decision of all of us. Not only is it out of respect for you, it's also out of respect for our own lives and deaths. No matter what happened in the past, we have to bear the consequences of our own choices on the battlefield. No matter how anxious we are now, we can only wait until the outcome of the battle is clear. Yin Yang let out a long howl and said, I understand now. If so, I shall send these 3 on their way first. I can't bear to let you all feel as if your hearts are frying in oil, so I shall grant you a quick death. Before he finished speaking, the saber move suddenly changed. The saber light spread out in all directions like a rippling light wave. In an instant, it engulfed the entire area, including the entire area. The blade was merciless, and the Tao was merciless. One move and 2 styles converged. With a whooshing sound, the saber light shone brightly. The 3 of them had a strange feeling at the same time. At this moment, they weren't facing a single person, but the might of the grand Tao that they'd been pursuing all their lives. Every cultivator who embarked on this path of cultivation could only rely on their own efforts to defy the heavens and go against the current. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. As long as there was the slightest mistake, there would be no mercy. This was the ultimate truth of cultivation, a truth that every profound cultivator knew. However, at this moment, all 3 of them were shocked to realize that the path they had taken had been wrong from the beginning. Even though they had stumbled their way to where they were now and persevered until now, there was no way to go on, and the future was bleak. The spring bearer's expression turned ghastly as he yelled at the sky, Am I wrong? So it turns out that the path I took was actually the wrong one? Have I made so many mistakes? Amidst the screams, he was dazed and suddenly stunned. However, it was this moment of distraction that allowed a ray of saber light to sweep past his body. A body quietly split into 2 halves. The upper half flew out diagonally and landed on the ground, but he clearly didn't feel the slightest pain. He raised his head and asked the sky, Is it really wrong? Then, what is the right thing to do? Before he could finish his sentence, the upper half of his body fell to the sky, no longer breathing. The illusory path of Tao suddenly split in a flash. Another 2 clangs rang out as the 2 gods' envoys were struck one after another, bleeding profusely and severely injured. However, both of them had gods' bones, and their physical strength was much stronger than that of others. They didn't die immediately, but their gazes were still dazed as they murmured, Wrong? How could it be wrong? Yin Yang snorted and said, The emergence of the 9 Supremes is driven by Tao, driven by heaven's will. The 4 Seasons Tower is defying heaven's will, how can it not be wrong? The 2 men's gazes were dazed for a moment, but then they became unusually fierce and ruthless. They yelled angrily, The cultivation of the human body is to cultivate from the mortal body to the realm of immortality. Who isn't going against the current, going against heaven's will? Why are we the ones who are wrong? Despite the 2 men's cries, the path of Tao in the sky clearly showed that they were wrong. They were wrong. Were they wrong? The 2 of them suddenly felt disheartened. The bright heavens will in the sky was telling them everything. Your path is wrong. There was no way forward. The 2 men roared, We have God's bones in us, we're gods when we gather them. What did we do wrong? What's wrong with that? As they screamed, they swung their sabers with all their might, blocking the countless saber lights from the path of Tao. The saber lights in the sky changed, and the door of Tao was also changing endlessly. It seemed to be saying one thing. You've installed God's bones in your bodies, but you didn't cultivate them yourself after all. So you're wrong. Even if you're gods in your eyes, why are you all a pile of bones in the end? Because they're not real gods after all. If so, they're already wrong, but you're still walking on a path that's even more wrong. Aren't you all even more wrong? Adding mistakes on top of mistakes, how can you still live? The two men listened to the voice of Tao as they defended. Suddenly, they felt hopeless. Mistakes on top of mistakes. Mistakes on top of mistakes. Amidst the screams, the determination to die in their eyes suddenly turned into despair. Since we're wrong, what's the point of living? Laughing bitterly, they pounced forward. Facing the divine edge, they did not evade, not fearing death at all. Saber Laic. A red mist suddenly appeared, descending from the sky. What appeared with the blurry light and shadow seemed to be another world of mortals. Seeing such a strange scene, both of them were shocked. Although they swung their swords to the left and right with all their might, they no longer had any offensive power to speak of. A faint mist-like saber light flashed past the necks of the two people. The outcome was decided. Two large human heads flew out, rolling in the air. However, the two men looked strangely calm. It was as if they had finally been freed, as if they had finally found the path of Tao. Wherever the saber light passed, blood splattered on the ground, overturning the mortal world. Yin Yang retracted his saber and stood upright, murmuring to himself, "So, this is the real Destiny blade, every slash, is God's will." Previously, when he had used Saber Truth, Destiny blade, it had always been a man wielding the saber, winning the battle with exquisite saber skills. This time, however, Emmy was fully focused, handing all of its power to Yin Yang. Emmy's deific consciousness had even merged with Yin Yang's, allowing Yin Yang to discover the deeper essence of Saber Truth, Destiny Blade for the first time. The power of Destiny Blade that he had unleashed in the past was only the tip of the iceberg. It was like scratching an itch through one's boot, it had yet to achieve its true meaning. Chapter 835. Soft sighs could be heard coming from the dark forest. A few silhouettes in yellow drifted out and moved the remains of the 6 corpses into the Temple of 9 Supremes, settling them down appropriately. One of them had just walked out of the temple when he smiled faintly. Lord Supreme Cloud is indeed worthy of the title of Supreme Wit. You're wise and resourceful indeed. The saber in your hand is marvelous and helpful. His words were insinuating that Yin Yang's ability to easily kill the 7 men was due to his strange weapon. Furthermore, he was hoping that Yin Yang would lose his composure after his great victory. Furthermore, he was young and impetuous. If he did not use this weapon, the other side would have taken advantage of him. Yin Yang replied faintly, "I was the one who initiated this battle. How can I be unprepared and facing a situation where I'm outnumbered in this battle of life and death? It's my fortune to be in possession of a weapon. Are you questioning the fairness of your esteemed tower's words?" Yin Yang's reply was to use his own words against his own shield. "You say that I won with a weapon and waver my state of mind. I'll say that you're dissatisfied with the other side's leader's main idea and disturb your Tao heart. Let's see who will give in first." The person said coldly, "Supreme Cloud, there's no need to speak irresponsibly and sow discord. I've long been indifferent to matters of life and death. However, the debt of blood is still fresh in my mind. There must be recompense." Yin Yang replied mockingly, "The debt of blood is still fresh in my mind? What I'm doing now is exactly what you've said. It's a pity that Lord Supreme Cloud's ultimate move can only be used once. I hope Lord Supreme Cloud has some other luck. Otherwise, you'll be a harbinger of misfortune and blood will be spilled everywhere." The person snorted coldly and disappeared into the dense forest in a flash. The ground was still drenched in fresh blood, but Ji Lingxi and Yin Yang were the only ones left alive. However, both of them knew that the real battle had only begun from this moment onwards. In the initial battle just now, Mr. Nian had used the lives of 7 men to completely suppress the 4 Seasons Tower's contempt toward Supreme Cloud. Of course, this result was largely due to the Springbringer's dissatisfaction, but at the end of the day, if they did not let someone try and see what was going on, everyone would inevitably be dissatisfied. After all, no matter how much Yin Yang's cultivation base had improved and how strong he seemed to be, he did not have a battle record that was worthy of it. Moreover, he was trapped in the spiritual restraining formation, unable to use the manifestation powers that he was famous for. It was only natural that he would be looked down upon. In spite of this, Yun Yang and Mr. Nian were certain that if they were to recklessly go up against Supreme Cloud with the mentality of dealing with an ant, it was still unknown whether Yun Yang would be finished, but the Four Seasons Tower's loss would definitely be much more than these 7 people. If they were not careful, the Four Seasons Tower's top-notch combat power might be completely annihilated. On the surface, it looked like the Four Seasons Tower had lost 7 experts, but no one had underestimated their enemy. It was worth it, and he died a worthy death. Now, no matter who it was, no one would treat Supreme Cloud as an ordinary opponent. The Four Seasons Tower's mentality now was that Yun Yang was an unparalleled expert who had even surpassed Ling Xiaozui back in the day. The situation before them was clear. Although Yun Yang's first successful slash was due to using a mystical saber that no one knew about and catching them off guard, Yun Yang was still the one who had firmly suppressed and controlled the entire situation when he faced the 3 men's joint attack. Furthermore, not only was Yun Yang not injured after killing these 3 men, his breathing did not even become heavier. This meant that Yun Yang's mystical qi consumption was limited in the intense battle just now. Even if it was not negligible, it would have a limited impact on the subsequent battle. If the Four Seasons Tower's men who had come to this conclusion still could not see how terrifying Yun Yang was, then they could really just line up under a crooked tree and hang themselves. Light clouds floated in the sky as the north wind blew and the sun shone brightly. It was already noon. In spite of this, the forest on Tianxian Cliff was shrouded in darkness. The visibility was terrifyingly low. From afar, Fu Baogua and the others could see that Tianxian Cliff was shrouded in thick fog that obscured the entire mountain ridge. The fog gradually spread to the surroundings, and in just a short period of time, nothing could be seen anymore. Only the faint chimes of swords and sabers could be heard from time to time, indicating that the war of the century was still ongoing. Yun Yang walked slowly in the thick fog while Ji Lingxi, who was wielding a long sword, was in front of him. Ji Lingxi insisted on walking in front of Yun Yang to ensure that everything was safe. Unable to dissuade her, Yun Yang could only agree. After all, based on the current situation, this was the best strategy. Right now, the enemies were all hidden in the dark. If the 2 of them still did not move in front of the temple, they would definitely become targets. The only way was to take the initiative to move. Even though they still did not know where the enemies were hiding, as long as they moved, they would not fall into the extremely bad situation of being surrounded by 22 people. With Ji Lingxi leading the way, this strategy of turning passivity into initiative was further perfected. The Four Seasons Tower might be able to tell from Ji Lingxi's movements, aura, and other aspects that her ability was extraordinary, perhaps even above Yun Yang's, but it was impossible for them to know that her greatest trump card was the red light barrier. After all, to Ji Lingxi, it was no longer a matter of whether or not she was afraid to fight, she was afraid that she would not fight. Just as both of them stepped into a thick bush, the ground caved in without a sound. This change happened abruptly, and the area of the collapse was as large as 100 feet in radius. Following the abrupt change, 2 beams of saber and sword light shot towards them from 4 different directions, still silent and undetectable. All of this was like a pantomime that was happening in a completely dark space. The entire process was soundless, but it was filled with murderous intent. Both Yun Yang and Ji Lingxi were on high alert. They had floated up the moment the ground caved in. However, their action of floating up seemed to be automatically sending themselves up for the other party's attack. 8 beams of cold light shot towards them at the same time, their timing perfect. It was obvious that they had already predicted Yun Yang and Ji Lingxi's movements and had already planned their follow-up attacks. In spite of this, Yun Yang and Ji Lingxi did not panic in the face of the attacks coming from all directions. They did not stop floating and pounced forward, one from the left and the other from the right. They were as silent as ghosts. Yun Yang's silent counterattack was instantaneous. His upended river of blood spilled out, the saber light that hung from the sky had already blocked all the incoming sharp beams of energy, producing a tinkling sound. Amidst the momentary stalemate, the next reincarnation under saber counterattacked with full force. Chapter 836. Only at the farthest end of this dark path, as if it was the end of the sky, was a faint glimmer that could only be vaguely seen but could not be seen clearly. Although they did not know what path it was and there were no hints, all the enemies who were attacking Yun Yang had a clear understanding in their hearts: it was the path of reincarnation. Legend had it that only the underworld's underworld had a reincarnation passage. This pitch-black road seemed to be able to attract all the attention of the witnesses. It was filled with an indescribable and indescribable temptation, causing everyone's mind to be in turmoil when they saw it. In a trance, they could not help but think of their past and present lives. The unique light of reincarnation under saber shone in front of him. As Yin Yang struck, he felt his wrist vibrate violently as a powerful force surged towards him. Then, he felt the resistance vanish and relaxed. Then, a low grunt came from afar. Yin Yang's thoughts raced as he quickly deduced that it was his divine edge clashing with the other party's weapon that caused the initial head-on feeling. The other party's cultivation base was impressive, otherwise, how could the residual force have affected him? In spite of this, the divine edge's unparalleled sharpness continued, breaking the other party's weapon after only a brief stalemate and injuring the other party. The silhouette in the dark flickered again as two more rays of light shot towards Yun Yang. Just as Yun Yang's saber broke a person's weapon and took the opportunity to injure him, they had already arrived in front of Yun Yang. Yun Yang dared not delay as he retreated swiftly. As the saber light turned and swept horizontally, his right palm slammed behind him as well. With a loud boom, the ambusher from behind was sent flying by his palm while the long sword of the ambusher from the other side was broken by the divine edge. However, there was a limit to one's strength. Even though Yun Yang had parried with all his might, it was still difficult for him to evade the last attack. He could only tilt his body slightly as a sharp gleam flashed past his chest. Despite the pain in Yun Yang's chest, he had already retracted his saber and retaliated with merciless Dao. The force of his attack was several times more ferocious than before. With a crisp clang, the last attacker from all four directions somersaulted away. As that person retreated, the enemies from all four directions retreated at the same time as if they had discussed it beforehand. On the other side, Ji Lingxi's long sword was moving in a disorderly manner. Her movements were as dazzling as fireworks, but she was only attacking without defending, surprising her four opponents. In this world, how could there be a girl with such profound cultivation, such explosive battle prowess, and such a valiant fighting style? Seeing is better than hearing 100 times. However, to fight us with such a flawed fighting style, no matter how high his cultivation base is, he will still die. How can there be a fluke? The moment their eyes met, both of them had already made the first move. They worked together to parry Ji Lingxi's sword, while one of them channeled his palm energy to divert Ji Lingxi's right hand away. The last of them found an opening and darted to Ji Lingxi's right side, slashing down with his saber. His target was the vital part of Ji Lingxi's slender neck, showing no mercy at all. At this point in the battle, Ji Lingxi was already on the brink of death. Even with a ridiculously high cultivation base, it was impossible for her to take on such an attack that was aimed at her vitals. In spite of this, Ji Lingxi did not seem to feel anything. She was still madly channeling her strength to attack the twin swords in front of her, determined to break through the interception and claim the enemy's life. In the blink of an eye, the saber light was like lightning. With a loud thud, it had already landed precisely on Ji Lingxi's neck. The person who had attacked extended his other hand with his fingers spread wide, obviously planning to behead Ji Lingxi and carry it away with his other hand to intimidate Yun Yang later. Once he thought about how he had beheaded Yun Yang's right-hand man, a confidant with unfathomable abilities, and how he would toss the beautiful head in front of Yun Yang later. He would like to see if this supreme cloud, who had awed the continent, would break down at once and have his soul dissipate. The person's gaze was cruel, his hand ready to strike. However, at the next moment, he was stunned. The powerful strike that could split mountains and split rocks had landed on the vital part of Ji Lingxi's neck, but her head had not been chopped off. No, not only had it not been chopped off, there was no sense of impact at all. What was going on? Could it be that this woman's defensive cultivation method was unique? Was that why she was attacking without any defense at all? As the thought flashed through his mind, he saw a flash of red light rise. What was going on? Was this a sign of a unique cultivation method? The person who attacked saw that the red light was gradually expanding, and it was actually rushing towards me? What the hell is this? Why is it so strange? The person's train of thought came to an abrupt halt at this moment. Because at this moment, he suddenly had a feeling that his body seemed to have collided with a mountain. A mountain that had flown hundreds of thousands of miles in the blink of an eye? If he had to describe it, perhaps it could be described in a way that everyone could understand. A sports car that was speeding at high speed had crashed into a high-speed train that was traveling at full speed. Furthermore, it had collided head-on with the high-speed train. Then, there was a loud crash. The other three people who were defending against Ji Lingxi's relentless attacks looked over in surprise, only to see their comrade fly up in confusion. Like an eagle, he opened his arms and soared into the sky at high speed. If you are an eagle, then soar into the sky. Yes, this comrade's posture was too similar. However, why did this eagle soar into the sky at an unparalleled speed and not come down for a long time? Then, the answer was revealed. The figure that soared into the sky and soared into the sky was clearly still ascending, but his body seemed to be unable to bear the burden and was disintegrating. Yes, it was disintegrating. His head, limbs, and body had all fallen apart. Could it be that he had soared too fast and the air resistance was too strong, causing his body to disintegrate? The minds of the three people spun quickly, but they still could not figure out what was going on. How could everything be so strange? The woman in front of them was still maintaining her aggressive attack mode, the sword in her hand exerting 300% of its power. The reason was simple. She was not defending at all. Offense was the best defense, but it did not mean that one should not defend at all. That's right. Didn't I just see someone chop her neck with a knife? That was a direct hit. Why could she still attack? It was then that Ji Lingxi realized that no matter how hard she tried to attack, she still could not do anything to the three men who were working together to neutralize her attacks. In a fit of rage, she suddenly hollered and sheathed her sword, charging straight at the three men. What kind of strategy was this? How could there be such a strategy in this world? This was no longer fearless, it was simply courting death, okay? The three people were shocked to see this. There must be something wrong with this abnormal behavior. There must be something fishy about the other party's actions when she was in a fit of rage. Two of them dared not act rashly, retreating swiftly as Ji Lingxi charged at the person in the middle like a mad bull. Seeing that he could not dodge in time, the person in the front thrust his sword out without hesitation, striking Ji Lingxi's heart. Looking at the flawless saber that was getting brighter and brighter in the thick fog, Yun Yang said faintly, "This saber of mine has such a mystical ability." However, what we see now is the fog formed by the formation. Even if the saber can absorb the fog is produced continuously. The effect of a unilateral absorption is minimal and not very useful. But this saber has other uses in the thick fog. Yin Yang chuckled softly. There were a total of 8 people in this wave of attack, right? Ji Lingxi asked excitedly, "How many did you kill?" Yin Yang coughed dryly and thought about it carefully before saying, "It seems like 2 of them were injured, but they've all escaped. The other party's abilities are formidable and they're opportunistic. It's not easy to kill them." Ji Lingxi chuckled. "How is it not easy to kill them?" "I killed 2 of them without much effort." What she meant was that he did not kill a single one of them while she killed 2 effortlessly. The sense of accomplishment was overwhelming. Yin Yang coughed. Was it really effortless? Then you didn't kill them, but shocked them? His tone sounded like a question, but it was actually a direct confirmation that the matter had been decided. Ji Lingxi snorted and stood with her arms behind her back. She lifted her head and said faintly, I've never cared about the process when I do things. I only look at the results. If the enemy is dead, then they're dead. If it was effortless, then it was effortless. This is the truth, the indisputable truth. The rest is not up for discussion. What a strong reason. It was hard to refute. Yin Yang had no energy to retort at this moment. He only had the urge to grab the girl and spank her bottom. However, it was only a thought, he could not put it into action. After all, the red light was cold and did not differentiate friend from foe. It was merciless when it came to dealing with him. Fiancé? Sweetheart? All of them were suppressed mercilessly. After all, this child was the biggest enemy of the person who had set up the red light. He was a little white pig who had taken the white jade cabbage. How could he have the audacity to grumble when he was incompetent? On the other side, none of the Four Seasons Tower's men were waiting at their original ambush positions. Instead, they had gathered at a secluded spot. Among them, there were a few whose expressions were completely unsightly. They were extremely unsightly. Two of them who were injured had slightly better complexions. Although they appeared weary, their fighting spirit had not waned. However, the other two, although they were not injured, their faces were deathly pale, paler than a dead person's face. Their eyes were filled with fear, like birds startled by the twang of a bowstring, in a constant state of anxiety. The entire secret valley was silent. When the crowd looked at Mr. Nian, their gazes were evasive. Mr. Nian looked at the 19 men in front of him. After a moment of silence, he said, Now, who else thinks that Supreme Cloud's reputation is undeserved? Who else thinks that Supreme Cloud can't withstand a single blow and can be easily killed? Step forward. No one uttered a sound. Supreme Cloud's only reliance was his manifestation powers. He himself was merely a weakling. After this battle, the knowledge of his mediocre ability had long become a thing of the past. Mr. Nian stood up with his arms on his back and said faintly, Then, who else thinks that you have the ability to fight alone? Please step forward and challenge Supreme Cloud. I'm glad to see you succeed. I'll send you off with all sincerity. Still, no one moved. Everyone present was aware of Yun Yang's ability, and he was assisted by the peerless blade. What was the difference between fighting him alone and seeking death? Mr. Nian said softly, Yutong's Supreme Cloud is renowned throughout the world. He became one of the 9 Supremes at such a young age, stirring the winds and clouds of Tianxian. He's always been one of the 9 Supreme strategists. He's the brainchild of the 9 Supremes. Victory can be decided from 1,000 miles away within his command tent. It can even be said that Supreme Cloud alone can shoulder half of the great reputation that the 9 Supremes have built throughout their journey, perhaps more. When the 9 Supremes were still around, perhaps Supreme Earth's planning was part of it, but Supreme Cloud's role in it was still not to be underestimated. After such a long time and searching the world, their true identities still couldn't be found. How could Supreme Earth plan so thoroughly alone? Thinking deeper, is Supreme Cloud's title of Supreme with just a rumor, or does he live up to his name? Is he truly worthy of his reputation? You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.